Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into velvet halls, candlelit chambers, and the intoxicating danger of royal love, because this is no fairy tale. This is the world of the Tudor queens and the affairs that both crowned and destroyed them. A time when one glance could doom you, a whispered promise could shake kingdoms, and a kiss could sign your death warrant. You, dear viewer, are about to slide quietly into the shadows of the Tudor court, and spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your city and what time it is right now in the comments. I want to see where and when we're all slipping into this story together. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive in the year 1509, stepping lightly onto the gleaming tiles of Greenwich Palace. The air carries a trace of beeswax polish, mingling with the garden's fading roses and the distant echo of lute music. The Tudor rose is blooming, both literally, embroidered across every visible surface, and symbolically, under young Henry VIII, newly crowned and already enamoured with the beautiful Spanish princess, Catherine of Aragon. At first glance the court dazzles, golden goblets, glittering tapestries, silk gowns floating like ghosts down draughty corridors. But linger a little longer, and the tension crackles beneath the surface. Every smile is measured, every glance is a gamble. This isn't a court of chivalry, it's a chessboard. And Catherine, newly queen, is playing a game that no woman has ever won. She enters the scene robed in dignity. Dark-haired, pious, and politically sharp, Catherine knows her role. Secure an heir, solidify the alliance with Spain, and play the perfect English queen. But even in her coronation procession, you can feel the weight she carries. She's already lost a husband, Henry's older brother Arthur. Their marriage was short, and whether or not it was consummated will soon become one of the most hotly debated details in royal history. You know, the kind of detail that can decide the legitimacy of an entire dynasty. No pressure. Catherine's early years as queen seem idyllic. She and Henry are young, attractive, and madly in love, or so the tapestries suggest. They host tournaments and masques, commissioning music, art, and architectural marvels. You get the sense that this is a golden couple, at least on the surface. But behind those romantic portraits is a growing fear. Year after year, Catherine's pregnancies end in tragedy. Stillbirths, infants who don't survive the cradle. One daughter, Mary, lives, but she is not a son. And in this kingdom, ruled by swords and succession, not being a son is more than a disappointment. It's a potential national crisis. And here's where things get sticky. Henry, full of divine right and Renaissance masculinity, begins to believe the problem isn't him, it's her. After all, he's a king, appointed by God. Surely God wouldn't punish him. No, the fault must lie in marrying his brother's widow. That tiny, technical, scriptural snag? Henry begins to see it as a cursed union, and the whispers around court begin to echo his doubts. This is where you start to see the darker gears of Tudor power grinding into motion. Ambassadors write home in veiled language. Courtiers shift their allegiances with the breeze, and Catherine, ever devout, clings to her marriage with a strength that feels almost defiant. She won't step aside, she won't fade quietly. She believes to her bones that she is Henry's true wife, before God and before the law. Meanwhile, you see, Henry's eyes begin to wander. Not quite affairs, not yet, but courtly flirtations, stolen glances, hands lingering too long during a dance. The court is a minefield of beauty and ambition. You begin to notice how young ladies in waiting move through these halls, each step careful, each smile calculated. Love and survival are often indistinguishable here. And Catherine is increasingly surrounded by younger, hungrier women. Historical fact, Catherine served as regent in 1513 while Henry was away fighting in France. During that time, she oversaw England's defence against a Scottish invasion and played a direct role in the victory at the Battle of Flodden. That's right. While Henry chased glory overseas, his wife secured the homeland like a boss. Quirky fact, Catherine was obsessed with needlework. Like, seriously. The woman stitched her way through political disaster, using embroidery as both therapy and power play. Some of her work survives to this day. Tiny tapestries of saints and flowers crafted while she waited for her fate to unfold. But there's an open debate among historians about Catherine's mindset in those final years of her marriage. Was she hopelessly idealistic, refusing to acknowledge the changing tides? Or was she a tactical genius, deliberately forcing Henry to make a public enemy of a beloved queen, thus casting herself as the innocent victim? Either way, You get the sense she knew what was coming and chose dignity over escape. And here's where it gets personal. You find yourself at a masque, candlelight flickering across jewelled masks and perfumed sleeves. Henry dances, laughter echoing like distant thunder. And standing just to the side of the king, eyes sharp, smile unreadable, is Anne Boleyn. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Catherine's chapter isn't quite finished. Her refusal to concede her crown leads to the great matter, a name so vague it sounds like a children's book, but was actually one of the messiest legal, religious and political crises in European history. Henry demands a divorce. Catherine says no. The Pope says, "Let me think about it," and Europe spirals into chaos. All over a marriage? Or was it really about a mistress, or an heir, or control? By the end of this chapter, you watch Catherine, stripped of her title, exiled to drafty castles and left to die without her daughter. Her last letter calls Henry her most dear lord and husband, and somehow even knowing everything, it breaks your heart. Because in the Tudor court, queens don't just lose crowns, they lose everything. So now you shift a little in your seat. The flicker of torchlight casting long shadows over velvet and stone, and you wonder, how does someone like Catherine of Aragon, a princess raised with absolute certainty of her royal destiny, lose everything and still keep her dignity? And then your eyes drift back to the woman standing just beyond the dancers, the one who isn't laughing, the one not dressed in gold but in an alluring calculated shade of deep green. Anne Boleyn. If Catherine was the old order, piety, loyalty, regal endurance, Anne is the storm gathering just offshore, and tonight she's catching the king's attention. You feel the shift in the room when she speaks. It's subtle, like a change in weather. Her voice isn't particularly loud, but Henry tilts toward her, his smile pulling wider. And Anne? She doesn't gush or flirt the way others do. She banters, she teases, she denies. And in a court full of women trying to please the king, Anne Boleyn does something far more dangerous. She challenges him. Anne has recently returned from the French court, and it shows. She's not just stylish, she's cosmopolitan, wittier than the English courtiers, a little more daring in how she moves. You can smell her perfume, spicy, a little sharp like orange blossoms and danger. And her eyes. They lock onto yours for a moment before returning to Henry. She knows what she's doing. But here's the twist. Anne wasn't supposed to be the one. Her sister, Mary Boleyn, had already been Henry's mistress. The Boleyn family, ambitious calculating, had offered up one daughter, and now it seems they're offering another. But Anne won't play that role. She makes it clear from the start she won't be a mistress. She'll be a wife or nothing. You're there as the king begins his descent, or his ascent, depending on how you see it. Letters fly between Henry and Anne full of tortured longing, erotic hints and exasperated yearning. He signs with little hearts and initials. He obsesses. Anne retreats. And with every refusal, every time she denies him her bed, he becomes more desperate to possess her completely. What begins as courtly love turns into a political crusade. This is no longer just about romance, it's about replacing a queen. Anne, in her early years at court, wasn't the conventional beauty. Her charm was a mix of intelligence, magnetism and unpredictability. Her features, dark eyes, strong nose, slender frame, were striking, not delicate. She carried herself like someone aware of the dangers and choosing to walk straight into them anyway. You wonder, is she brave or just reckless? Henry's obsession burns for years. He begins the process of breaking from Rome just to divorce Catherine. He's ready to reshape the religious foundation of England itself, just to get what he wants, and what Anne demands. But that's the thing about Anne Boleyn. She doesn't just want a crown, she wants influence, voice, power. She's read the new theological works, understands reformist ideas, and knows how to wield her intelligence like a sword. And to a man like Henry, that's intoxicating. Until it isn't. Historical fact time. In 1533, Anne finally gets what she asked for. She marries Henry in secret, already pregnant with the future Elizabeth I. By June, she's crowned queen in a lavish ceremony meant to prove that the old order is gone and the new has arrived. And yet, only months into her reign, the glow begins to flicker. The baby is a girl. A brilliant red-haired girl, yes, but not a son. And we've already seen how well that goes down in Henry's England. Fringe detail. Anne had a 6th fingernail. Not a 6th finger, as some dramatic rumours suggest, but an extra nail on the side of her pinky, possibly. It became one of many so-called signs that she was a witch, a sorceress, a temptress sent to lure the king to ruin. Of course, more likely it was a minor birth defect. But the Tudors didn't do nuance. There's an open scholarly debate that still stirs up Tudor fans at 3 a.m. Did Anne actually love Henry, or was she playing a long political game, using love as leverage, holding her virginity as a weapon to secure her family's rise? Some argue she believed in reform and wanted to change England. Others say she simply played the cards she was dealt and played them better than anyone else, until she didn't. As queen, Anne's life shifts instantly from flirtation to surveillance. She can't make a misstep. Catherine may have been a saint, but Anne is already marked as a sinner. Every move she makes, who she dances with, how she laughs, how many hours she spends with a court musician, is watched. You see her now sitting stiffly at a banquet, nodding politely, eyes scanning for enemies. And they are everywhere. The court, once enchanted by her, now begins to whisper. Anne is sharp-tongued, too confident, too French. She doesn't inspire the quiet reverence Catherine did, she incites reactions. Adoration, yes, but also hatred. And the moment she begins to falter, when another miscarriage follows and then another, those whispers grow teeth. You remember the Anne from that first dance, defiant in green silk. You remember how the air changed when she entered a room, and now you watch her try to hold it all together. Crown, marriage, future, while the walls close in. Henry's love is fading. Jane Seymour waits quietly in the wings, and Anne, she's still fighting. What makes Anne Boleyn's story so endlessly magnetic isn't just her fall. It's how high she rose, and how she did it. She dared to want more in a world that punished women for ambition. And she changed a kingdom, whether she meant to or not. Love, lust, politics, it's all tangled together in her story, and as you tuck yourself a little deeper under the covers, you realise something chilling. This is just the beginning of the Tudor Queen's affair with danger. Because Anne isn't the last woman who will bet everything on the king's favour. She's just the first to lose. You can feel it coming like a shift in barometric pressure. The air at court grows still, brittle. Every smile is now loaded, every silence louder than before. Anne Boleyn, once the uncatchable flame that Henry chased for 7 years, is now Queen of England and rapidly becoming a cautionary tale. The very same wit and boldness that once thrilled the king now grates on him. And when you're in Henry's orbit, adoration is never guaranteed. You're only as safe as his next mood swing. You stand near the edge of the Great Hall one chilly evening, watching Anne pace along the tapestried corridor with a restlessness that betrays her polished smile. Her child Elizabeth toddles in another wing of the palace, doted on by a small but fiercely loyal household. Anne still believes she can produce a son, that her place is secure, but the miscarriages are stacking up, and Henry is growing colder by the day. There's something haunting about Anne now. The sparkle in her eye has dimmed, and her sharp tongue, once a seductive weapon, now slices through tense conversations like a dagger. You notice the courtiers watching her differently, not with awe anymore, but calculation. Which side of history will she fall on? How many days does she have left to charm her way back into favour? And then there's Mark Smeaton. He's not a noble, not even close, just a low-born musician with skillful fingers and a soft, sensitive face. You might not even notice him at first, fiddling quietly in the corner during court banquets, but Anne notices. And not in the way the stories suggest, no secret trysts or hand-brushing against thigh, but in the way a queen might notice any man with the potential to be useful, amusing or loyal. Maybe she tosses him a kind word, maybe she asks him to play her favourite French song, maybe, just maybe, she lets her guard down around him. And that was enough. Because here's the thing, when a queen is unpopular, anything can be twisted into evidence, and soon the rumours start to spread. Smeaton has been seen leaving Anne's apartments too late at night. He looks flushed. She laughs when he plays. The court eats it up like roast swan. You can almost see the invisible ink on the walls, drawing lines between Anne and the men around her. And it gets worse. The king's advisors, especially Thomas Cromwell, a man with the warmth of a wet gravestone, are tightening the noose. They've had enough of Anne's reformist leanings, her foreign friends, her inability to produce a male heir. The writing's on the wall, and it's not written in love letters this time. It's inked in indictments. Smeaton is the first to break. Or rather, he's broken. Tortured into confessing that he slept with the Queen. And even though he's the only one of Anne's alleged lovers not of noble birth, which makes the accusation implausible from a protocol standpoint, it sticks. People like stories that make sense, and a seductive queen and a lovesick musician, that's juicy, never mind that there's no proof. Truth isn't what the court wants, it wants resolution, it wants a scapegoat, and Smeaton is perfect for it. Historical fact. Mark Smeaton was arrested and interrogated without legal counsel, a privilege his noble co-accused received. His confession was likely obtained under torture, or at the very least the threat of it, which was considered fair play for someone of his rank. He eventually confessed to adultery with the Queen, an act of treason punishable by death. Quirky detail? Smeaton may have been a bit of a dandy. Reports suggest he wore fine clothes and gold chains, unusual for someone of his station, leading to jealousy and suspicion. Some say he was vain, perhaps too sure of his place at court. Others think he was just trying to survive in a world that punished ambition without a title. But here's the debate that still circles among historians and fans alike like vultures at a feast. Did Anne actually have any affairs? Or were the charges entirely fabricated by Cromwell and Henry to clear the path for Jane Seymour? The evidence is paper thin, dates that don't line up, testimonies that contradict each other, and men who claim they were miles away during the alleged crimes. It's like watching a badly directed play where everyone's reading from a different script. Still, Anne is arrested. You watch her as she's escorted down the stone steps of Greenwich Palace to the barge waiting below, bound for the Tower of London. Her face is pale, but she holds her head high. She smiles, not the smile of someone resigned to death, but of someone refusing to show fear to the vultures circling overhead. She'll be tried for treason, adultery, and incest. Yes, incest, but we'll get to that disaster soon, and the court will lap it up. Even if you shouted the truth from the ramparts, no one would hear it over the sound of sharpening blades and scandalous whispers. And you find yourself watching Henry, the same man who once wrote Anne letters dripping with passion, now avoids her name, rides off to play the grieving victim, and focuses his attention on Jane Seymour, a pale, quiet woman who promises no trouble, no fire, just suns and silence. So here you are, sitting with your back against the cold wall of the tower, listening to the gulls squawk overhead and the river slap against the stones. You think about how fast things turned. 1 minute, Anne is the king's obsession, a comet blazing through the court. The next, she's a cautionary tale, her light fading in a cell that smells of damp stone and betrayal. And poor Mark Smeaton, he'll never play again. He'll be hanged, drawn and quartered in public, his body reduced to a warning. Not because he seduced a queen, but because he made the mistake of standing too close to one when the king decided she was a threat. Love stories in the Tudor court rarely end with happily ever after. They end in blood, in silence, or in the cold pages of court transcripts scribbled in shaky Latin. So rest easy tonight, knowing this. In the Tudor world, love isn't blind. It's just very, very expendable. You've barely blinked, and yet the stage resets. The velvet curtains close on Mark Smeaton, but the play barrels forward, more twisted than before. If a lowly musician's supposed affair with Anne Boleyn is scandalous, then what happens next grabs that scandal and cranks it to 11. The next name pulled into the king's manhunt is George Boleyn, Anne's own brother. Yes, you heard that right. Buckle up, because this is where court gossip turns downright medieval. George is no background character. He's tall, confident, a touch arrogant, and more than a little too clever for his own good. You've seen him recite poetry at feasts, argue theology with bishops, and duel in tournaments with a cocky grin that suggests he doesn't believe anything bad could ever happen to him. But like Anne, George is a creature of the court. And like Anne, he's about to find out what it costs to be too close to power when the wind changes. The rumours begin with the delicacy of a hammer, whispers of Anne's inappropriate closeness with her brother, strange hours spent in conversation, private meetings, shared confidences, erforst. It doesn't take much. The court's appetite for scandal is ravenous, and now that the gates have opened, everyone wants to throw something to the wolves. You're standing near the edge of the council chamber when the charges are formally read: adultery, conspiracy, treason, and incest. It's almost laughable, except no one's laughing. Henry isn't even pretending to be shocked. He just stares forward, blank-faced, as if hearing someone else's name entirely. Anne collapses, George flinches, and you? You can feel the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. There's no evidence, there's no logic, But logic hasn't mattered for a while now. What matters is removing Anne completely and permanently, and if that means dragging her brother to the scaffold beside her, then so be it. Now here's your historical fact. George Boleyn, Viscount Rochford, was indeed charged with incest and treason. During his trial he defended himself eloquently. Too eloquently, maybe. He reportedly laughed at the absurdity of the charges, even when the verdict was already decided. One of his supposed crimes? Being present at private times with the Queen and failing to report her alleged affairs. That's how thin the prosecution was slicing it. But let's not pretend George was some innocent flower. He had a reputation, one of charm, brilliance and possible cruelty. There are reports, vague of course, that he may have been a bit of a womanizer, a heavy drinker, and a man who liked being closer to the flame than was wise. Fringe detail. Some scholars speculate George may have been bisexual. That's a word the Tudors didn't exactly toss around, but coded letters, intimate male friendships and lingering court gossip suggest he wasn't quite the chaste, upright nobleman history sometimes pretends he was. Still, none of that matters now. The moment Anne is arrested, George's fate is sealed. He knows it. And as you walk with him down the long grey corridors of the tower, you start to understand what it feels like to be a pawn in someone else's endgame. Anne is accused of sleeping with 5 men. George is just the most scandalous of the lot. The court doesn't care whether it's true. They care that it fits the narrative. Anne as temptress, Anne as corrupter, Anne as threat. In her own prison chambers, Anne asks over and over, "Why George? Why my brother?" And the answer is simple. Because taking down a queen isn't enough. They have to destroy the idea of her, rip her from the roots, make the people not just angry but horrified. Incest does that. It makes the story unpalatable, even grotesque. Suddenly, Anne isn't a tragic romantic figure. She's a monster, a seducer of her own blood. And now there's no sympathy left to spare. The open scholarly debate here is whether the incest charge was meant to be taken seriously or was just a political manoeuvre. Many historians believe even the court knew it was nonsense, but it was effective nonsense. It made Anne toxic, untouchable, and more importantly, it justified swift execution in the eyes of the public. You're there on the morning George is executed, watching from the cold stone walls of the tower. He climbs the scaffold in his fine dark coat, the sky grey and low. He speaks with a composure that's almost eerie, making a final speech about loyalty and repentance that dances just around the truth. He doesn't admit guilt, he doesn't name names, but his voice doesn't waver, not once. The axe falls. There is no cheer, just silence and the quick rustle of cloth as people turn away, eager to forget. Anne hears the news within the hour. Her brother is gone. The others, Norris, Brereton, Weston, gone too. Only one left to go, and she knows she's next. You pass her window that afternoon and hear her singing softly. Not hymn, not prayers. A French ballad about courtly love and betrayal. Her voice is thin but steady. It echoes against the walls, curling upward like smoke. This is where things feel almost unreal. How does a story go from flirtation to execution in 3 years? How do a king's most trusted companions, a queen's own brother, get torn from their lives on paper-thin accusations? And why does it work? Because this is Tudor England. Because perception is reality. Because once you're painted as a villain, especially a female one, there is no redemption arc. And so Anne sits alone now, awaiting her turn. The court has turned away. Her daughter Elizabeth is just a child, unaware that her mother's name is about to be scrubbed from history. And you're left watching it all unravel, wondering how much of this is justice, how much politics, and how much just spite. Because in the end, it wasn't love that killed Anne Boleyn, it was the lie that she ever had enough power to win. Morning comes with a breeze that smells like metal and river mist. The tower is quiet. Too quiet. You're standing near the green where they've erected the scaffold, not on Tower Hill like most executions, but inside the walls, in private. Because when it comes to killing a queen, even Henry prefers discretion. Anne Boleyn has spent the night praying, confessing, maybe even laughing, if the guards are to be believed. This morning she dresses with care, dark grey damask, modest headdress. She doesn't want anyone to say she died in vanity. You walk alongside the silent crowd that lines the tower courtyard. Servants, nobles, guards, all watching but no one speaking. It's a strange thing, watching a queen walk to her own death. She's small, slighter than you remembered. The The same woman who once wore emerald silk and danced with dangerous eyes now carries herself with eerie grace, not defiant, not defeated, something else entirely. Resigned, perhaps, or maybe just tired of being the story instead of the writer. Anne climbs the steps of the scaffold. The French swordsman, imported specially for the occasion, waits beside the block, hoodless, looking more like a cook than an executioner. No axe today, no chopping and hacking, just one clean stroke if all goes well. A favour, Henry calls it. You wonder if Anne sees it that way. She addresses the crowd, voice firm, words carefully chosen. She praises the king, she forgives her enemies. She says she dies the king's true and humble wife. It's the final performance in a court obsessed with appearances. And just before she kneels, she adjusts her headdress with surprising calm, her fingers steady. Then in a swift motion so fast you barely register it, it's over. The queen is dead, and the court doesn't even stop to mourn. The same day, Henry is dressed in white and preparing for his next wedding. Jane Seymour, the demure lady-in-waiting who managed to capture his wandering heart before Anne's body cooled, is already being measured for her crown. But let's not move on just yet, because while Anne is gone, her legacy is anything but quiet. Elizabeth, her daughter, is declared illegitimate, shuffled off into obscurity, and yet, decades from now, she'll rise to become the most powerful monarch England ever knew. That's the twist. Anne lost her head, but she won history. Meanwhile, George Boleyn's wife, Lady Jane Boleyn, the infamous Lady Rochford, remains at court. Yes, the very woman who may have helped send her husband and sister-in-law to the scaffold. You've seen her before, elegant, sharp-eyed, always on the edge of the inner circle. People say she gave testimony that helped the case against George, or maybe she was forced to, or maybe she made it up entirely. Opinions vary. As always, the truth is coated in gossip and ink. Historical fact, Lady Rochford gave evidence during the investigation of Anne Boleyn, and though the exact details remain unclear, she was instrumental in helping build the case, possibly out of jealousy, fear, or political calculation. Years later, she'd be executed herself, tangled in another scandal involving yet another queen. But we'll get to that mess soon. Fringe fact, George Boleyn was known for his translation of religious texts, and was deeply involved in the Protestant Reformation. He wasn't just a party boy with a title, he was politically and theologically active, which made his fall not just a family tragedy, but a blow to the reformist faction at court. And here comes the open debate that still fuels academic Twitter fights to this day. Did Jane Boleyn betray her husband and sister-in-law deliberately? Or was she manipulated by Cromwell and the rest of Henry's cronies? Some argue she was coerced, threatened with her own ruin if she didn't cooperate. Others think she saw a chance to save herself or even to rid herself of a loveless, possibly abusive marriage. No definitive answer. Just a woman caught in the teeth of Tudor politics, trying not to choke. You watch her now, months later, moving through court like a ghost in pearls. She serves Jane Seymour with flawless manners, never speaking of what's come before. But you can't help wondering, does she dream of George? Does she replay those final days? Those whispered questions from the investigators, wondering if she could have answered differently. Court doesn't pause for grief. If anything, it thrives on recycling tragedy. Jane Seymour becomes queen with almost mechanical speed. Unlike Anne, she plays it safe. No politics, no arguments, no French songs. She embodies everything Henry wants in a wife now. Obedience, fertility, quiet elegance. You sit beside the fire on a rainy afternoon, watching her embroider a christening gown. And you know what she's really stitching as a future, the hope of a male heir. But Anne's ghost lingers, not literally, though if any Tudor queen were to come back and haunt her old chambers, it would be her, but figuratively. The courtiers still whisper her name, they still tell stories of her wit, her downfall, her last laugh. Some admire her, some resent her, all remember her. And you start to realise that in this world love is currency, and so is silence. Everyone plays the game. Some gamble with flirtation, others with loyalty, but eventually they all lose something, their title, their reputation, their life. Anne Boleyn gambled everything on the promise of power through love. She got the crown, she got the king, and then she got the blade. But even in death, she left behind something more powerful than scandal, a daughter who would someday rewrite what it meant to rule. Still, the court moves on. You hear laughter in the distance, music, the clinking of goblets. It's as if nothing happened. The scaffold has been taken down, the blood has been scrubbed away. but if you listen closely in the dead of night, sometimes you can still hear it. Anne's voice, light and mocking, echoing through the halls she once commanded. She may be gone, but she's not forgotten. Not by you, not by history, not by the hundreds of women who walk the line between desire and danger every day at court, wondering if they're looking at their future king or their executioner. The scent of roses fades. The echoes of Anne's execution, though still lingering like ghostly perfume in the halls of court, begin to dissolve into the whitewashed narrative Henry prefers. Anne is buried, Elizabeth is declared illegitimate, and suddenly everyone is expected to move on, which they do, because in Henry's England, survival often means pretending nothing happened. You don't whisper about Anne Boleyn anymore unless you want trouble. You talk instead about the new queen, Jane Seymour. Now Jane is different. If Catherine was dignity and Anne was fire, Jane is still water. Clear, calm, and impossible to read. She doesn't flirt, doesn't provoke, doesn't push. She listens, she nods, she speaks only when necessary, and when she does, it's with soft words dipped in honey. Watching her is like watching someone who's memorized the script and isn't taking any creative liberties. You can almost see her calculating every expression, never too happy, never too sad, always just enough to be seen and not questioned. The court breathes a sigh of relief. After the hurricane that was Anne, Jane feels like safe harbour. Henry parades her around like a prize he won for surviving 2 disastrous marriages. People call her a peacemaker, a restorer of order, the perfect queen, but you've been around long enough to know perfection at court is always just well-managed fear. Still, Jane knows exactly what she's doing. She was one of Anne's ladies-in-waiting. She saw firsthand what ambition could get a woman. Brief glory and then a sharp fall. So she plays it cool, she doesn't argue, she doesn't demand, she waits. Because Jane's value isn't in her voice or her opinions, it's in her womb. You watch the pressure grow, everyone is holding their breath. Jane's main job, her only job, is to give Henry a son. That's all he wants now, no more grand love stories. No more flirtation turned into political drama. Just a boy who can wear a crown and make everyone forget that Anne ever existed. Historical fact. Jane Seymour did in fact give Henry what he wanted most, a legitimate male heir. In 1537 she gave birth to Edward VI, the child who secured her place in Henry's heart forever. Finally, after years of anxiety and political chaos, the Tudor line had its male successor. Jane, in that moment, became the most successful of Henry's queens, at least by the grim standards of the day, but here's the dark irony, she didn't get to enjoy it. Less than 2 weeks after Edward's birth, Jane died of postnatal complications, and while Henry would go on to marry 3 more times, he would request to be buried beside Jane when his time came, because in his eyes she had completed the mission. She'd done what no other wife had done, she'd given him a son and died before she could disappoint him. Let's not skim past this part. Jane's death wasn't quick. Childbirth in the Tudor period was practically a coin toss with the devil. The idea that delivering a son guaranteed your safety. That was a myth, and Jane proved it. She lingered for days, feverish and in pain, while the court celebrated Edward's birth with banquets and bells. You sit by the window as the cries of the newborn echo through the corridors, while the Queen, the woman who made it all possible, fades quietly in a room that smells of blood, sweat and rosemary. Fringe detail. Jane Seymour's motto was bound to obey and serve. It's embroidered in gold thread on her personal banners, like a glittering red flag for modern feminists. But for Jane, it wasn't just a motto, it was a strategy. She saw what happened when Queen stepped out of line, so she never did, at least not publicly. And that brings us to a curious debate. Was Jane Seymour truly the obedient angel everyone claimed she was? Or was she simply the most strategic of the Tudor queens? Some historians argue that Jane was far more politically savvy than she's been given credit for. After all, she managed to secure the king's heart, maneuver herself into marriage just days after Anne's execution, and produce the son that secured her legacy. That's no accident. That's a masterclass in quiet power. You remember a moment, a private dinner in a smaller chamber, where Jane sits across from Henry, smiling gently as he grumbles about taxes and traitors. She offers no bold opinions, just murmured agreement. And yet, the way she tilts her head, the way she watches him so carefully, you know she's absorbing every word. She's not empty-headed, she's just careful, and maybe that's what made her so dangerous. Because the most effective queens didn't always need to shout. Some ruled by knowing exactly when to keep their mouths shut. After Jane's death, the court enters mourning. But it's a strange kind of mourning. Public, performative, and short-lived. Jane is remembered with portraits, poems, and praise, but soon even her memory is repackaged into something useful. Henry needs to move forward. The dynasty must continue. One son isn't enough, and he's not about to stay single, which means you, dear observer, are once again watching the king's courtship gears grind into motion, and this time the stakes are different. Henry is older, more paranoid, and now known for dispatching wives like he's swatting flies. You start to notice how the women at court change. They're quieter, more cautious. Their smiles are tighter. Everyone remembers Anne. Everyone remembers Jane's bloody bed. No one wants to be next, but someone will be. The halls feel colder now. Jane's presence was soft, but her absence echoes. She came in silence and left the same way, with only a son and a whispered legacy to mark her time on the throne. But in the shifting chessboard of Henry's heart, she left a scar. And that, you suspect, is what made her his favourite. You lean against the stone archway, watching the baby prince being carried through the gardens. He's swaddled in satin, cradled by nurses, guarded by a dozen servants. This child is the future, the answer to Henry's prayers. The cause of one woman's death and another's eternal praise, and yet even now the shadows are creeping back, because the king is looking again. And the next queen? She's barely a woman. The year is 1540, and the court is once again shifting, ever restless, like a stage between performances. Jane Seymour is gone, entombed and adored in Henry's memory, sainted by her success in producing a male heir and dying before she could disappoint him. You'd think the king might pause, reflect, even mourn properly, but no, that's not how this works. The throne beside him grows cold far too quickly, and Henry, wounded and aging, looks outward once more. The cycle continues. The whispers begin again, and into this glittering, deadly theatre steps a girl who's barely more than a child, Catherine Howard. You see her long before Henry does. She's already here, giggling softly among the other ladies in waiting, her sleeves too long, her perfume too sweet, her laughter a touch too loud. You can tell she hasn't quite figured out the game yet, or worse, she thinks it's just a game. Catherine is young, yes, but she's also beautiful in that dizzying way that makes powerful men do irrational things. Her smile is dangerous, but not because she intends it to be. It's dangerous because it's so effortless. She's the niece of Thomas Howard, the Duke of Norfolk, and you already know that man plays the court like a chessboard missing half its rules. He pushed Anne Boleyn into Henry's line of sight once, and now he's at it again. The Howard family has learned one truth. The fastest way to power is through the king's bed, and Catherine, she's their newest offering. You stand in the corner during her first private audience with Henry, watching the king, now bloated, limping, and perpetually sour, suddenly softened under the heat of her youth. She curtsies, voice trembling but sweet, and for a brief moment, he's transfixed. She calls him her prince, and you know that's not innocence. That's survival dressed as flattery. You can almost hear the Howard uncles rehearsing her lines behind closed doors. Henry is smitten, not just with Catherine's face or figure, but with the fantasy she represents. His youth, returned. His manhood, rekindled. His pride, repaired. And Catherine? She smiles wider. She plays the part, but there's something in her eyes that suggests she doesn't quite grasp what she's walked into. She thinks she's the star of a romance. She has no idea she's wandered into a bear trap. Historical fact. Catherine Howard was likely around 17 when she married Henry, who was 49. Their wedding took place in 1540, mere weeks after the annulment of his brief and awkward marriage to Anne of Cleves. Catherine had been a lady-in-waiting to Anne, and Henry began pursuing her even before that marriage ended. It was quick, messy, and very Tudor. And Catherine, she played along. She wore the jewels, accepted the flattery, took her place on the throne. But unlike Anne or Jane, she didn't seem to have a plan. She wasn't pushing religious reform or calculating political moves. She was just there, laughing too brightly, spending too freely, living too loudly. You'd think that kind of joy would be refreshing, but here at court it's more like bait. And here's the twist, the one you can't ignore. Before Catherine became queen, she had already been involved in romantic entanglements, with men like Francis Derham, her former music tutor, and possibly Henry Manox, another early flame. Relationships that may have involved secret gifts, touching, and even the exchange of vows. The line between flirtation and pre-contract was blurry back then, and now it's weaponized. Fringe detail? Catherine once kept love letters in a locked cabinet while she was at Lambeth Palace under the guardianship of her step-grandmother. That cabinet was later ransacked when the scandal broke, revealing a trove of evidence that would be used to help destroy her. What once seemed like adolescent infatuation became proof of premarital impurity, something a queen could not afford. There's an ongoing debate. Was Catherine Howard reckless or just young and naive? Some historians argue she was foolish, oblivious to the consequences of her actions. Others say she was groomed, used by her family and the court system as a pawn, never truly understanding the stakes until it was too late. Maybe it's both. Maybe she was a child thrown into the deep end with sharks and told to smile. You see it start to unravel not long after the wedding. The king dotes on her, sure, calls her his rose without a thorn, but she's restless, young, trapped in the private chambers of a man who can barely walk, let alone dance. The court buzzes with her flirtations, her late-night laughter, the glances she trades with a certain man named Thomas Culpeper, and even though everyone tries not to notice, no one really looks away. It's the quiet moments that are loudest. Catherine slipping out of chapel early, a servant swearing he saw her hand brush Culpeper's, a letter, a late-night meeting. You watch the court pretend it doesn't see anything, right up until it sees everything. Because once the rumours start flying, they don't stop. Catherine's past lovers reappear like ghosts, Francis Derham among them, boasting, bragging, desperate to be remembered or spared. Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop, delivers the fatal blow. He presents the king with a dossier of Catherine's former indiscretions, her premarital dalliances, her possible adultery. Henry's reaction is not anger at first, it's disbelief, grief, a tantrum that echoes through the corridors. He locks himself away for days, and when he emerges, something in him has broken. Catherine is arrested. Derham was tortured, strung on the rack until he screams. Culpeper too. And Catherine, she is dragged from court to Tyon House. Detained, confused, begging for mercy. She writes a letter to the king, pleading for his forgiveness, swearing she was deceived, swearing she loves only him, it never reaches him. You stand beside the scaffold on February 13th, 1542. Catherine wears black velvet. She is 20. Her lips tremble, but she doesn't cry. She kneels down, and before placing her head on the block, she whispers a final request. To die the wife of the king. And then something else. Words that will live forever in the echo chamber of history. I die a queen, but I would rather have died the wife of Culpeper. Whether she actually said that or not, you'll never know, but the image burns behind your eyes. And just like that, another queen is gone, another cautionary tale carved into the stones of the tower. The court turns away, new gowns are ordered, new masks are scheduled. But you can't help but look at the young ladies still left behind, fresh-faced, perfumed, dressed in silk, and wonder how many of them will follow Catherine's path. How many think they're just falling in love? And how many don't realise they're already being watched? It always starts the same way. A glance, a gesture, a joke that lingers just a moment too long. In a different world, these are harmless things. In Henry VIII's court, they are the first shovels of dirt on your grave. You've seen it happen before, how the slow pull of attraction turns into a noose. And now, with Catherine Howard cooling in the tower's soil, her death is still fresh in everyone's minds. But even that doesn't stop what's coming next. Because love, or at least lust, never does what it's told. Especially not here. Enter Thomas Culpeper. You remember him from before, don't you? Tall, dark-haired, broad-shouldered, with the kind of confident swagger that made him a favourite at court. He was one of Henry's own gentlemen of the Privy Chamber, which meant he was always close. Close enough to hand the king his nightcap, close enough to whisper jokes in his ear, close enough to see the look in Catherine's eyes when the king's back was turned. And Catherine, she noticed him too. Their flirtation didn't come crashing in like thunder. It crept. You watched it build like fog, curling around corners of the palace unnoticed at first. A word here, a sly glance there. It was all innocent enough, until it wasn't. Soon Culpeper was lingering outside her rooms at strange hours. Her ladies-in-waiting, particularly one Jane Boleyn, back again like a bad omen, began arranging little nighttime strolls, private meetings, quiet talks, and maybe more. That's the thing, you're never quite sure what did happen behind those locked doors. Were they simply talking? Was it emotional, physical? The evidence that survives is frustratingly vague, pieced together from confessions made under pressure and the scribbled notes of men with axes to grind. What we do know, Catherine wrote Culpeper letters. She called him yours as long as life endures. And she met with him in secret more than once. That alone, in Henry's eyes, was enough. You remember the first time the king heard the rumour? He was mid-feast, drinking sweetened wine, laughing with his advisers, and then suddenly, he wasn't. The smile vanished. The cup dropped. The room froze. Because if Catherine had betrayed him, it wasn't just it was treason. A wound to his pride. A joke at his expense. And Henry did not take kindly to being mocked. Historical fact, Thomas Culpeper was arrested and accused of having a sexual relationship with Queen Catherine Howard. Alongside Francis Derham, he was tried and convicted of treason. His execution was especially brutal. He was sentenced to be hanged, drawn and quartered, though it was later commuted to a simple beheading, a mercy rarely granted. Fringe detail? Culpeper had a history of violence. Before his downfall, he was implicated in the attempted rape of a park-keeper's wife. He was pardoned, of course, he was close to the king, after all, but the incident leaves a stain. It paints him as more than a charming rogue. It hints at something darker beneath the velvet and smiles. There's a debate among historians that still simmers. Was Culpeper the pursuer or the pursued? Did he manipulate a young naive queen into secret meetings? Or was Catherine the one who initiated the affair, desperate for passions, connection, anything that felt real in her gilded cage? Or were they just two foolish young people caught in the gravitational pull of each other and completely unaware they were speeding toward obliteration? You watch Culpeper's final days unfold like the closing act of a tragic play. He confesses, reluctantly, bitterly, claims the Queen was the one pushing for more, says he intended to do ill but never did. It's the most Tudor confession possible, vague, insinuating, full of holes and fear. He knows what's coming. There's no pardon waiting this time. The morning of his execution is bitterly cold. The courtyard is slick with frost. Culpeper walks with a stiffness that betrays the bravado he once wore like armour. He doesn't say much at the scaffold, just a few words of repentance. He dies cleanly, quicker than Derham, who meets a far bloodier end. Still, the silence afterward is heavy. Another name scratched off the palace rolls. Another heartbeat snuffed out because the Queen smiled at the wrong man. And what of Jane Boleyn, Lady Rochford, who facilitated those meetings? Ah yes, she's pulled into the storm too. Again. You watch her unravel under interrogation, rambling, contradictory, panicked. She descends into what they call madness, though whether it's real or convenient is up for debate. Henry changes the law specifically so he can execute her, even in her supposed madness. You have to admire the commitment to cruelty. Jane Boleyn is beheaded shortly after Catherine. No ceremony, no sympathy, just a name erased, a memory blackened. For all her manipulation, her survival instincts, her whispered betrayals, she couldn't outwit the game this time. Her part in the scandal of Culpeper and Catherine seals her fate. And Catherine, well, you already saw her end. Now there's a strange hush over court. The music softens. The party's dull. The women wear darker sleeves. It's not mourning, it's calculation. How do you laugh after what's just happened? Who dares catch the king's eye now? You see it in their faces. The younger girls shrinking back, the older ones offering flatteries with their heads bowed low. No one wants to be the next Catherine Howard, and yet somewhere deep in the crowd someone always will. The whole affair with Culpeper is a reminder, maybe the most chilling one yet, that even proximity to a queen's affections is enough to get you killed. You don't need to touch her, you don't need to love her, you just need to be seen near her. And once the court decides the story it wants to tell, facts become flexible, motives irrelevant. You walk the gardens later that week, the same ones where Catherine once laughed too loudly, where Culpeper once stood a little too close. The leaves are falling now, turning gold and brown, crunching underfoot. You can almost hear the echo of their conversations, the rustle of skirts, the nervous laughter. Ghosts, all of them now, trapped in the memories of a court that moves forward without mercy. But you remember. And the next time a woman looks at a man in these halls with anything more than polite indifference, you'll wonder. Is it love? Or is it a death sentence? It should be quiet now. After Catherine Howard and Thomas Culpeper and all the blood on the Tower Green, you'd think the court might pause, reflect, maybe even learn. But it doesn't. Not for long. The music starts again. Softer at first, the gowns return, the feasts swell, and the same dances play out, just with different partners. If you listen closely, you can hear it. The rustle of ambition brushing up against fear, the whisper of silk over stone. And slipping through the shadows once again is someone you thought you'd seen the last of. Jane Boleyn, Lady Rochford, or rather, what's left of her. Let's rewind just a bit. Jane Boleyn's story is like a thread that keeps knotting itself tighter each time it's pulled. Sister-in-law to Anne Boleyn, widow of George Boleyn, a woman who survived one queen's fall by testifying against her own husband, only to later die for her role in another queen's fall. And yet somehow, despite her deeply cursed resume, for a while she survives. After Anne and George, after the trials and executions, Jane remains permanent at court, rehabilitated, reassigned, repurposed, like an antique piece of furniture that's been restained and pushed into a different corner of the palace. You see her again during Catherine Howard's reign, serving as a lady in waiting. Imagine it. Jane, who once knelt at Anne's feet, now attending a teenage queen who flirts like a breeze and giggles through mass. You wonder what Jane thinks as she watches Catherine drift through the court. Does she see history repeating itself? Or does she believe, foolishly, that this time things will be different? And then Catherine starts sneaking around with Culpeper, and Jane, somehow for reasons that baffle everyone with a working sense of survival, helps arrange their meetings. She delivers messages, escorts the Queen, unlocks doors, acts like a chaperone when she knows exactly what's going on, which leads you to the million-pound question, why? Historical fact, Jane Boleyn was instrumental in facilitating Queen Catherine Howard's clandestine meetings with Thomas Culpeper. During the investigation, she confessed to aiding their meetings, and claimed she was coerced into it by the Queen, whom she described as young and willful. But no matter the reason, her involvement was undeniable and fatal. Fringe detail? Jane once reportedly claimed that helping the Queen was like being forced to play a part in a play she hadn't auditioned for. She felt dragged into it, swept up in the recklessness of a teenager in love. But it's hard to reconcile that image with the woman who previously helped bring down Anne and George. A woman doesn't become that good at surviving without knowing exactly what she's doing, until she isn't. And here's the real debate. Was Jane Boleyn a calculating survivor who finally made one fatal misstep? Or was she a deeply traumatised woman, emotionally frayed after years of navigating Tudor power games, who finally snapped under pressure? Historians can't agree. Some paint her as the cold-eyed architect of her husband's fall. Others see her as a victim of politics, of court gossip, of mental illness, and perhaps even of the king himself. When the Catherine Culpeper affair unravels, Jane is arrested along with them. But something's different this time. Jane isn't just frightened, she's unravelling. Her letters become confused, her statements incoherent. She's described by those around her as rambling, unstable, paranoid. She breaks under pressure, and for once not in a way that saves her. Henry faces a dilemma. Jane is considered insane, and by the laws of the time the insane cannot be executed. But this is Henry VIII, and laws are just suggestions dressed up in Latin. So what does he do? He changes the rules, literally. Parliament passes a new act allowing the execution of the insane if they're guilty of treason. He custom writes her death into law. If nothing else, it's impressively petty. You're there the morning she's taken to the scaffold, February 13th, 1542, the same day as Catherine. They die within hours of each other, one after the other, like a closing double act. Jane walks slowly, dressed in black, her hands shaking. No defiance, no dramatic speeches, just quiet misery. Some say she doesn't even fully comprehend what's happening, that she believes it's all a cruel rehearsal that will end before the curtain falls. It doesn't. The sword falls again, and that, it seems, is the end of Lady Rochford. The woman who witnessed more Tudor bloodshed than most generals. A woman who hovered near the throne for decades, survived political storms that swallowed others whole, and who finally misjudged the tides one last time. You walk the palace halls afterward and feel her absence like a pressure drop. Jane Boleyn may not have been popular, but she was a known quantity, a fixed figure in an ever-changing world. And now she's gone, buried in an unmarked grave near the Tower Chapel, beside the sister-in-law and husband she helped destroy. But her legacy? That's more complicated. Some remember her as a traitor, others as a scapegoat. Some even pity her somewhere, imagining what it must have been like to be married to George Boleyn, to live in Anne's shadow, to be passed from queen to queen like a cursed relic. She is all these things at once, villain, victim, warning, and what remains in the wake of her execution is a sense of exhaustion. The court is weary, Henry is older now, his legs ulcered, his temper short, his patience non-existent. No one speaks of love anymore, not really, not out loud. Affection is dangerous, loyalty is transactional, and the women of the court, they lower their eyes when the king enters, smile only when smiled at. They are learning at last that favour and ruin often walk in lockstep. But you remember the women who came before, Catherine Howard, Anne Boleyn, Jane Boleyn, each one different, each one deadly, and each one proof that in Henry's court being loved, or merely useful, was never enough to keep you alive. So now, as another feast is announced, another alliance arranged, and another eligible young woman arrives fresh from the countryside. You wonder, does she know the floor is still slick with blood? And then, of course, there's Anne of Cleves. Poor lucky Anne of Cleves. The queen who was never really a queen, and the one woman in all of Henry VIII's romantic apocalypse who managed to escape with her head, her money, and, miraculously, her dignity. When she arrives in England in the winter of 1539, all eyes are on her, and yours too, of course. You can't help it. Everyone wants to see the new bride, the one summoned from the chilly courts of the German duchies to warm the bed of an ageing, increasingly irritable king. From the start, Anne's story feels different. She wasn't chosen with the usual method, meaning Henry didn't spot her at a mask and fall into a hormonal spiral. This was a diplomatic deal, a Protestant alliance. Oh, England needed friends, and Germany, specifically the Duchy of Cleves, seemed like a smart political match. Henry, too far gone in ego and ulcers to sail across the Channel himself, sent Hans Holbein, his favourite artist, to paint the woman he might marry. No pressure, right? Historical fact. Holbein painted Anne's portrait in 1539, and it was said to flatter her. The painting showed her as demure, elegant, gentle-faced. Henry liked what he saw on canvas. When Anne finally arrived in England, however, things shifted. Now, here's the moment where you find yourself sitting on the edge of your metaphorical Tudor seat. Henry arranges a little meet-cute, disguises himself, rides out early, and shows up at Rochester Castle where Anne is resting after her long seasick voyage. He wants to surprise her, just like in the chivalric romances, come in unannounced, sweep her off her feet, let her fall in love before realising she's landed a king. It's all very charming in theory, except it goes horribly wrong. Anne doesn't recognise him, doesn't bow, barely reacts. Maybe she thinks he's a messenger, maybe she's exhausted, maybe she's just not impressed. Either way, Henry storms out fuming, and just like that, the romance evaporates. You can almost feel the temperature of the court drop several degrees as the king rants about how she looks nothing like her Sobot portrait, that she's like a Flanders mare. A comparison so cruel and so often repeated that it's become part of Anne's legend, whether or not he ever actually said it. Fringe fact, there's no solid evidence Henry ever used the Flanders mare insult, though historians and novelists alike have clung to it for centuries. What's clear is that he was deeply disappointed, whether it was about her appearance, her voice, her smell, her inability to match his flirtatious energy. Something about Anne didn't work for him. The marriage was doomed before it even began. But here's where Anne plays the smartest game of all. She doesn't fight. The marriage is short and awkward. There's no real intimacy. Henry reportedly couldn't bring himself to consummate it, despite boasting otherwise to save face. You imagine the long, excruciating evenings, the forced politeness, the way Anne probably lay stiff as a board while Henry, half-hearted, grumbled about foreign manners and Protestant stiffness. Then, within 6 months, Henry wants out. He begins poking around for grounds to annul the marriage. No consummation? Check. Previous betrothal back in Cleves? Conveniently remembered. And Anne? She doesn't protest. She nods. She smiles. She says, "Of course, Your Majesty," and she signs the papers. You'd think that would be the end of her. A discarded wife. An embarrassment. But no, Anne plays it better than anyone else. She's given a generous settlement. Hever Castle, Anne Boleyn's old family home, because irony's still very much alive, a lifetime income, her own court, and the prestigious title of the King's beloved sister. She remains in England, attending court events, exchanging letters with Henry, and very pointedly not ending up with her head on a spike. And here's the real twist. Henry likes her more after the marriage ends. She becomes a kind of royal mascot, appearing at events when needed, smiling serenely from her assigned place, never stepping out of line. She becomes exactly what every Tudor woman was supposed to be: agreeable, invisible, and just removed enough from danger to remain safe. There's a scholarly debate about Anne's intelligence. Was she simply lucky? Or was she a master of quiet manipulation, understanding from the start that her best play wasn't passion but patience? Some argue she genuinely believed Henry was still an eligible match and simply did her duty until dismissed. Others think she was shrewd enough to recognise a flaming disaster when she saw it and chose to jump ship with the silverware still in hand. Either way, Anne of Cleves becomes a rare thing, a royal survivor. No torture, no public disgrace, no exile. You see her in later years, slightly rounder, more confident, hosting guests in her private estates, sipping wine while others lose everything for the chance she was given and gracefully refuse to fight for. Fringe detail? Anne developed a fondness for English ale and playing cards. She reportedly held lively games in her household and maintained good relationships with her servants. She even had cordial ties with her stepdaughters, Mary and Elizabeth, and remained on the periphery of royal life with a kind of peaceful detachment no other of Henry's wives ever achieved. You catch one final glimpse of her in 1557, just before she dies. She's older, her hair streaked with silver, her eyes still sharp. She watches the palace from her window and says nothing. She's seen kings and queens fall. She's heard the screams from the tower. And she's still here. Not beloved like Jane, not feared like Anne, not mourned like Catherine, but alive. And sometimes that's more than enough. Because in the long, blood-soaked ledger of Henry's wives, Anne of Cleves gets the strangest title of all, the one who got away. You wouldn't think he'd do it again, would you? After Catherine Howard, after the sweet-faced teenager bled out under the executioner's blade, you might imagine Henry would swear off marriage entirely. A quiet retirement, perhaps. Long walks in the garden, a few illegitimate flirtations, an aging lion grumbling over state papers. But no, this is Henry VIII. The man has 5 marriages behind him and still believes the next one will finally be the fairy tale. And just like that, in 1543, you're holding your breath again as another woman prepares to say yes to the most dangerous husband in England. Enter Catherine Parr. At first glance, she doesn't look like a risk. No flashing eyes, no scandalous past, no teenage giggles. Catherine is calm, composed, mature, 30 years old and already twice widowed. You might even call her sensible, which feels like a dangerous word in Henry's world. She's the kind of woman who speaks carefully and listens more than she talks. But don't mistake that for passivity. You'll learn soon enough, Catherine Parr may be the most dangerous queen of them all, not because she rebels, but because she survives with her mind intact. When you first see her at court, she moves like someone who's read the rulebook backward and forward. She's intelligent, truly sharply intelligent, speaks several languages, writes poetry, has a deep, sincere interest in theology, which in Tudor times is basically agreeing to juggle torches while standing on gunpowder, especially when your husband is the king and your beliefs tilt a little too close to Protestant reform. Still, she catches Henry's eye not with seduction, but with something even more effective: solace. By now, Henry is old, overweight, and often in pain. His leg wounds fester, his temper flares, he's paranoid and lonely, and Catherine, ever the careful reader of people, sees what he needs isn't another flirt. He needs a nurse, a companion, someone to soothe the roaring beast without making him feel weak. Historical fact: Catherine Parr married Henry in July 1543. She became his 6th and final wife and would outlive him by a year and a half. But she didn't enter the marriage eagerly. In fact, she was already in love with Thomas Seymour, brother of Henry's 3rd wife Jane. She reportedly wanted to marry Thomas instead, but was pressured, possibly by the king himself, into accepting the royal proposal. You imagine the moment she agrees to marry Henry. There's no giddy celebration, no swooning romance, just a long silence, a single nod, and perhaps a glance toward Thomas Seymour that says, "I don't want to do this, but I will." And so she becomes queen, again stepping into the gilded cage, again smiling for portraits and nodding through ceremonies, again learning how to hold power without drawing attention to the fact that she's holding it at all. Fringe detail: Catherine was the first Queen of England to publish a book under her own name, twice, in English, while still alive. That's no small thing. For a woman, let alone a queen, to write and circulate theological arguments was nothing short of revolutionary. She was bold with her pen, careful with her tongue, and far more dangerous in print than she ever appeared in person. But the court is never a safe place, especially when you're clever. Catherine pushes her luck. She surrounds herself with reformist thinkers. She holds salons for religious discussion. She dares, very carefully, to challenge the more conservative Catholic leanings still lingering in Henry's court. And then she does the most audacious thing yet. She tries to debate him. One night, in his private chambers, she dares to contradict Henry during a theological discussion, just a little. Just enough to make him snap. And something in him changes. You see it in his eyes, the same shift that preceded Anne's fall, Catherine's arrest. That blend of betrayal and rage, pride and fear. Because Henry cannot be challenged, not even by a wife who reads more Latin than he does. The next morning, the air in the palace tightens. A warrant is drawn up for her arrest. You overhear it being passed down the chain, quietly, quickly. Catherine is to be taken to the Tower for her heretical views, and for a brief moment the script seems set to play out once again. But Catherine isn't Anne. She isn't Catherine Howard. She doesn't crumble or deny. She adapts. She throws herself at Henry's feet and apologises, not with tears, but with strategy. She insists she only argued with him to distract him from his pain. She praises his wisdom, his divine understanding. She flatters him so expertly that by the end of the exchange, Henry not only forgives her, he commends her. The arrest is cancelled. The warrant vanishes. Catherine survives. Here lies the open scholarly debate. Did she know about the warrant before she apologised? Was it a preemptive act of submission? Or was her grovelling, spontaneous, a brilliant last-minute pivot that saved her life? Either way, it worked. And that's the part that matters most at Henry's court. As queen, she continues to walk the tightrope with grace. She becomes close with Mary and Elizabeth, mentoring the younger princess, encouraging her education. You picture the two of them together, Elizabeth, precocious and observant, learning by example how to wield power from behind a smile. Catherine Parr isn't just surviving, she's shaping the future. But the fairy tale doesn't last. Henry dies in January 1547, bloated, infected, half delirious. His last words, if any, are lost to history. Catherine is finally free. And what does she do? She marries Thomas Seymour within months. The same Thomas she'd loved before. The one who made her heart beat faster before politics and survival smothered the flame. Only now, Thomas is not the dashing rogue of her daydreams. He's reckless, vain, and increasingly inappropriate around the teenage Elizabeth, who now lives in their household. Catherine sees it. She tries to control it, but jealousy, discomfort, and tension grow. She becomes pregnant. Her first time after 3 previous marriages, it should be a triumph. Instead, it's her end. In September 1548, Catherine dies of childbed fever just days after giving birth to a daughter. Thomas is not at her side. He's already manoeuvring for power, already eyeing Elizabeth more than is acceptable. Fringe detail. Catherine's final days were full of delusion and sorrow. She reportedly accused Thomas of poisoning her, of abandoning her. How, whether it was the fever speaking or the culmination of years of disappointment is hard to say. Her last words, by some accounts, were, "My lord, I would have had more of your love than you gave me." And just like that, the queen who outlived Henry dies not by politics, not by scandal, not by execution, but by childbirth, like so many women of her time. Quiet, uncelebrated, and tragically ordinary, but not forgotten. Because Catherine Parr was more than a caretaker, more than a survivor. She was a writer, a thinker, a reformer. And she lived through Henry's love and came out the other side with her soul mostly intact. In Tudor England, that's not just survival, it's a miracle. You'd think Catherine Parr's story would end neatly with her quiet burial and the birth of her daughter. It's a tidy conclusion. A 6th wife who outlived the king, survived court intrigue, and tried to finally grab some personal happiness in the wake of her royal servitude. But Catherine's death doesn't close the curtain. Instead, it kicks off another scandal, the kind that unfolds slowly, like a spider web being woven in the dark. And at the centre of it all, Thomas Seymour, her charming, reckless and dangerously inappropriate husband. From the moment Henry VIII's body cools, Thomas Seymour starts positioning himself. You see it in his smile, wider than grief allows, in the way he dresses, brighter, flashier than protocol demands, Catherine hasn't even been in the ground a year, and Thomas is already casting around for his next angle. He's ambitious, and ambition in post-Henry England is a game soaked in risk. The king is dead, but his son Edward, Jane Seymour's son, is now on the throne, only 9 years old, which means there's a power vacuum and Thomas wants a seat at the top. Trouble is, his brother Edward Seymour, now Duke of Somerset, is already Lord Protector, ruling on young King Edward VI's behalf. Thomas naturally thinks he deserves more, and when you're locked out of power, what's the next best thing? Proximity, influence, marriage, specifically to someone with royal blood. And wouldn't you know it, there's a young princess right under his nose, living in his house, under his roof, Princess Elizabeth. Yes, that Elizabeth. She's 14, intelligent, observant, already careful with her words, but also young, lonely, vulnerable. And Thomas Seymour? He knows exactly how to blur lines that should never be blurred. You remember how it started, playful tickling, teasing, affectionate nicknames? But it escalates. Early morning visits to her bedchamber. Inappropriate touching. Elizabeth's governess, Cat Ashley, grows concerned. Catherine Parr, still alive at the time, notices too, and begins supervising the encounters, even joining them to keep things innocent. That's right. Catherine was there, watching, managing. Historical fact, these incidents are detailed in letters and later testimonies. After Catherine's death, the behaviour worsens. Thomas visits Elizabeth more frequently, sometimes in his nightgown. He tries to isolate her. He offers to marry her, secretly. Elizabeth's household grows tense, aware that something is off, but uncertain how far it's gone. Fringe detail? Thomas once reportedly cut Elizabeth's black morning gown to pieces while she wore it, joking that she looked too solemn. Yes, cut it, as in with scissors, while laughing, because nothing screams affection quite like undermining a teenage girl's grief. Historians have long debated whether it was flirtation, grooming, or a combination of both. Either way, it's gross and dangerous. Eventually, the situation becomes too uncomfortable to ignore. Elizabeth is removed from the household and sent to live elsewhere, but the damage is done. Whispers begin to circulate. Thomas's ambitions become bolder. He tries to arrange a marriage between Elizabeth and Edward VI. He bribes servants. He breaks into the king's chambers at night, possibly to kidnap him, or worse. His behaviour moves from inappropriate to outright treasonous. And finally, in 1549, he's arrested. You're standing in the Tower courtyard when Thomas is dragged in. He looks stunned, like someone who believed his charm could get him out of anything, and only just realised that it won't. He's interrogated, and his schemes spill out like wine from a cracked goblet. But what the court really wants to know is, what happened with Elizabeth? She's questioned, repeatedly, closely. For a 14-year-old girl, Elizabeth holds her own with terrifying precision. She denies impropriety, denies any promise of marriage, denies every hint of scandal. She is polite, sharp and careful. If she's shaken, she doesn't show it. You realise, watching her, that she's already becoming the queen she will someday be. Not by title, but by survival. There's a scholarly debate about how much Thomas's pursuit of Elizabeth damaged her. Did she grow cold to love because of him? Did it shape her decision never to marry? Was it trauma or calculation or both? Some suggest she was complicit. Others argue she was groomed. The truth lies somewhere murky, somewhere unsettling. All we know is that afterward, she never lets anyone get that close again. Thomas Seymour is executed for treason in March 1549. Before he dies, he tries to write one last letter to Elizabeth, but it's intercepted and burned. There's no farewell, no final word. He dies not as a romantic fool, but as a threat to the realm. The court barely flinches, and Catherine Parr's legacy? Tarnished, not by her own actions, but by the man she loved and the scandal he left behind. Her household, once a place of learning and respect, is remembered instead for whispers in dark corners and brushes with ruin. Her daughter, Mary Seymour, born just before Catherine died, vanishes from the record before her second birthday. No one knows what became of her. Just another Tudor woman swallowed by silence. You walk the halls of Sudeley Castle now quiet. The nursery empty, the hearth cold. You can still picture Catherine reading scripture by the fire, Thomas leaning in too close to Elizabeth, the servants exchanging worried glances. It's all gone now. Another household destroyed by ambition. And Elizabeth? She files it all away, learns from it, builds walls around herself. You'll see her again, of course. She's not done, not by a long shot, but after Thomas Seymour she never trusts easily again, never lets her heart outrun her mind. She will flirt, she will dance, she will receive love letters from men who ache to marry her, but she will never say yes. Because if there's one thing the Tudor queens and their lovers have taught her, one lesson she never forgets, it's this: love can get you killed. So here you are, hovering at the edge of the court once again, but this time everything feels different. You've seen queens fall, heads roll, scandals bloom and rot. But now, as the throne is passed from the sickly child King Edward VI to the ill-fated Mary of Frousse, and then finally to the daughter of Anne Boleyn, something shifts in the air. This isn't a story about wives anymore. This is about a queen who needs no husband, a woman who saw what love did to her mother, to her stepmothers, to herself, a woman who turned survival into sovereignty. You're standing in the early days of Elizabeth Tudor, and the legend of the Virgin Queen is just beginning. Elizabeth is 25 when she takes the throne in 1558. And let's be clear, no one expected her to survive this long. She was declared illegitimate, imprisoned in the Tower, questioned over treasonous plots, kept under guard during Mary's reign, and nearly executed more than once. She's been trained, tempered, and tested like a blade. And when she finally ascends the throne, she does so with a smile that says, "I dare you to try me now." She wears white to her coronation, pale, unadorned, virgin-like, symbolic, sure, but also strategic. She knows the power of optics. She knows that in a kingdom starved for stability, what they need isn't another ruler. They need a symbol, a sphere, a story. And Elizabeth? She's been crafting hers since she was old enough to understand the executioner's axe. But here's the thing no one wants to say too loudly. Elizabeth was never meant to be alone. Not in theory. The moment she became queen, the pressure to marry thundered down around her like a cathedral collapsing. Parliament begged her. Ambassadors circled like sharks. Suitors lined up across Europe like peacocks in silk hose. She was young, unmarried, and politically valuable, and she refused them all. You watch her hold court in those early years, fending off marriage proposals like a cat swatting moths. Not with scorn, no, never that. With wit, with carefully chosen words, with that mischievous glint that says, "You can chase me, but I'll always be a step ahead." And there's one man who keeps pace longer than the rest, Robert Dudley. Historical fact, Robert de Lelay, Earl of Leicester, was Elizabeth's childhood friend. They'd both been imprisoned in the Tower during Mary's reign, he just down the hall. After Elizabeth becomes queen, Dudley is appointed Master of the Horse, a position that requires constant close proximity. Naturally, the rumours begin immediately, and they don't stop. They spend hours together. Ride out on hunts, whisper in corners. She calls him Sweet Robin. He's handsome, charming, and fiercely loyal. The chemistry between them is undeniable. Even ambassadors comment on it. And here's where things get complicated. Because Robert Dudley is married. His wife, Amy Robsart, lives far from court. She's rarely seen. Sickly, they say. Depressed, some whisper. And when Amy dies suddenly in 1560, falling down a staircase and breaking her neck, well, you already know what happens next. Fringe detail. The coroner's report on Amy's death noted 2 wounds on her head and no evidence of a struggle, but the location of the wounds and the suspicious circumstances, alone at home, servants away, sparked immediate rumours. Was it an accident, suicide, or was it murder? No one can agree, not even 5 centuries later. The scandal rocks the court. Elizabeth doesn't marry Dudley. She can't. Not after this. The rumours would destroy them both. Instead, she draws back. Keeps him close, but not too close. Promotes him, flatters him, and uses him as a warning to others. You may think you understand the game, but I write the rules. There's a scholarly debate that never dies. Did Elizabeth ever truly love Dudley? Were they lovers, secretly married? Or was it all a carefully crafted performance to keep her courtiers off balance and her throne secure? Some argue she wanted to marry him and changed her mind after Amy's death. Others say she never intended to. That he was a decoy, her favourite toy in a world full of blades. You, watching from the side of a summer garden where Elizabeth walks arm in arm with Dudley, can't help but wonder. She smiles at him, listens to him, laughs at his stories. But her eyes scan the horizon constantly, like she's never fully relaxed. Like she knows she's being watched. Because she is. Every second, every smile is a political move, and every sigh has consequences. Elizabeth flirts with kings and princes like a cat batting string. She entertains marriage proposals from the Duke of Anjou, from Philip of Spain, yes, her sister's widower, from archdukes and Habsburgs and heirs to thrones you've never heard of. But each time she finds a reason to delay, to deflect, to politely decline, and every time she does, the legend grows. The Virgin Queen, not untouched necessarily, just unmarried, unclaimed. She turns chastity into power, virginity into propaganda. Her face appears in paintings surrounded by pearls, moons, and symbols of purity. Her motto becomes Semper Idem, always the same, and she means it. But make no mistake, Elizabeth is not lonely. She has favourites. Dudley is only the first. There will be others. Suitors with flushed cheeks and hopeful poems. Ambitious young men who rise quickly and fall just as fast. But none of them ever own her. She allows desire, but not possession. She plays the game better than anyone who ever sat on the throne before her. You watch her at twilight, standing on a palace balcony as the sun slips behind the trees. Her gown shimmers like water. Her ladies hover at a respectful distance. Dudley stands beside her, not touching, not seeking, just there. And you wonder, does she ache? Does she long for the warmth of a real hand, a real home, a husband? Or did she burn that part of herself long ago, the day her mother's head fell into a basket? Love, for Elizabeth, is not a blessing. It's a trap she escaped. And she never lets herself forget what it cost her mother to try and have both. He's always there. Robert Dudley, your ever-present shadow. He stands behind her throne, not quite touching, but always near enough to feel the warmth of her skin when she passes. Decades pass, and yet his presence never cools. He's the only man who seems to survive Elizabeth's orbit for more than a season. Others rise and fall like waves, but Dudley? He lingers, a constant, a reminder, her sweet Robin. You see them everywhere, riding together through Windsor's green parks, whispering during council meetings, exchanging long glances across a crowded hall. And you know everyone knows that what they share isn't just friendship, it's deeper, stranger, more dangerous. Is it love? Maybe. Is it power? Definite till. Whatever it is, it's intimate, intoxicating, and entirely unsanctioned. Let's be clear, Elizabeth doesn't do anything by accident, not even her affection. And Dudley, he knows how to work it. He plays the humble servant, the ever-loyal companion, but you've seen how he smiles when the other courtiers bow. You've seen how his eyes flick over ambassadors, daring them to question his place. He may not wear a crown, but he's closer to it than any man dares dream. Historical fact. Elizabeth elevated Dudley to Earl of Leicester in 1564, a powerful title granted long after Amy Robsart's mysterious death. By then, rumours of their relationship had already spanned years, and despite the scandal, she never fully let him go. Even when marriage was politically impossible, she kept him close. His rooms were always near hers, his influence unmistakable. But the court never forgets Amy Robsart. That fall down the stairs, still suspicious, still unresolved, hangs over Dudley like smoke. Every time Elizabeth smiles at him, someone raises an eyebrow. Every promotion he receives, every whisper in her ear, stirs fresh speculation. Was it an accident, a suicide, or something worse, fringe detail? After Amy's death, Dudley sent repeated messages urging a full and public inquiry into the matter. He knew the rumours could destroy him. The coroner's inquest concluded it was an accident, but almost no one believed it. The staircase, after all, wasn't steep enough. The injuries were odd, and Amy was alone. Always alone. The question is, did Elizabeth believe him? You watch her face when someone mentions Amy's name. It freezes, just for a moment. Then the smile returns. Elizabeth, ever the performer. But there's something behind her eyes. Something that says she knows, or at least suspects. And she makes her choice anyway. She never marries him. She keeps him dangling for decades, just close enough to feel the warmth, but never close enough to reach it. And maybe that's love, in the only way she can allow it. Maybe it's punishment. Maybe it's both. You're at Kenilworth Castle in 1575, watching Dudley throw the grandest party in Tudor memory. It's a spectacular gesture. Lavish banquets, water pageants, fireworks. For days the Queen is treated like a goddess. Rooms are decorated with verses written in her honour. Music floats through the air like perfume. He's making his final desperate bid to win her hand, and you see her, gliding through the festivities in glittering white, smiling at the poets, bowing to the musicians, but never giving him what he truly wants. She leaves unmarried. Again, there's an open scholarly debate about Elizabeth's inner life, whether her refusal to marry Dudley stemmed from fear, strategy, or deeper mistrust. Did she doubt his involvement in Amy's death? Did she see his ambition and recoil? Or was it the simple truth that loving him was enough, but marrying him would have ruined them both? What we do know is this: she kept him close always, through plague, through politics, through rising favourites and foreign wars. Dudley was her anchor. When he married someone else in secret, a young countess named Lettice Knollys, who happened to be Elizabeth's cousin, the Queen's rage was volcanic. She banished Lettice from court, called her the she-wolf, refused to ever see her again. You don't cross the Virgin Queen and walk away unburned. Still, Dudley survived it, apologised, returned to favour, because Elizabeth forgave him more than she ever forgave anyone else. He understood her loneliness, her pride, her fear. When her counsellors pushed her to marry foreign princes, he was the one who reminded her she didn't need to. When war loomed, he stood beside her. When her strength faltered, he steadied it. Historical fact: Robert Dudley was one of the commanders at the time of the Spanish Armada in 1588. He was trusted with military responsibility despite his lack of experience. That trust came directly from Elizabeth, who, even as her other advisors questioned his qualifications, never did. You remember the last time she saw him, September 1588, just after the Armada, just after England's unlikely triumph over Spain. He was ill, but still standing, still smiling, still trying to be the man she needed. He left her a letter, his final one. Elizabeth kept it in a locked box at her bedside for the rest of her life. On it, in her own hand, she wrote, his last letter. Fringe detail? The letter still exists today. Faded ink, shaky handwriting, nothing dramatic, just ordinary affection. But Elizabeth cherished it like a relic. In a life of masks and politics, that letter was something real. When he died, she locked herself away, refused food, refused company. For days no one could reach her. The court panicked. But you understand, she had lost more than a favourite. She had lost the one man who'd loved her as both queen and woman. She never named a new favourite. Not truly. Oh, others came, young, brash, handsome. But none of them filled the space Robin left behind. You see her in her later years, wrapped in white and pearls, her face powdered like marble. The legend is fully formed now: Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, the untouchable monarch. But behind the mask is a woman who chose power over partnership, rule over romance, survival over surrender. And maybe, if the world had been kinder, or she less wary, things might have been different. But Elizabeth saw what love did to the women before her. She saw the price, and she chose never to pay it. It's an ordinary morning in Cumnor Place, Oxfordshire, when a servant finds the body of Amy Robsart sprawled at the bottom of a short flight of stairs. Her neck is broken. Her gown lies oddly arranged, her head turned at a strange angle, her hair spilled out like a dark halo. No one heard her fall. No one saw it happen. And yet, within hours, the whispers begin. Was it really an accident? You've heard of Amy before, of course, or the wife left behind, the quiet woman tucked away in the countryside while her husband, Robert Dudley, danced daily attendance on Queen Elizabeth. She was supposed to be a footnote, an inconvenience. But her death becomes the kind of historical question that never dies, only festers. Because what happened on September 8th, 1560 didn't just end a life. It nearly ended the reign of a queen. Amy had married Robert when they were both young during the full reign of King Edward VI. It was a love match. So they said, which was rare enough for nobles, but you can imagine what that meant. Two ambitious teenagers with nothing but prospects and promises, caught up in a family of schemers. When Robert's father, John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, was executed for attempting to place Lady Jane Grey on the throne, Robert's fortunes fell. He was imprisoned in the Tower. Amy stood by him, wrote to him, waited, and then came the miracle. Robert was released. Elizabeth, newly crowned queen, named him her Master of the Horse. He rose faster than anyone thought possible. But Amy, she stayed behind. Historical fact: After Elizabeth's accession, Amy lived away from court, often in the rented country houses. She rarely saw her husband. They wrote occasionally, polite, restrained letters, but it was clear they lived in separate worlds. Amy increasingly isolated. Robert basking in royal favour. Fringe detail? Amy suffered from a mysterious illness in her final months. Her servants described her as pained, melancholic, often bedbound. Some now speculate she had breast cancer, which was poorly understood at the time and often accompanied by bone weakness. Others wonder if the illness was less physical, depression, despair, or even poisoning, though by whom remains an open question. The day she dies, Amy insists all her servants attend a fair. She's unusually insistent. They obey reluctantly. When they return, she's dead. The stairs she fell down? Only a few steps, not enough to break a healthy person's neck, but her collarbone is shattered. The coroner's inquest concludes it was accidental, a tragic fall. But you can feel the tension rising. No one believes it. The rumours erupt like wildfire across Europe. Amy's death is a scandal with legs. Suddenly Robert Dudley, already controversial for his intimacy with the Queen, is suspect. The idea that he arranged to have his wife killed to marry Elizabeth spreads fast. Some think he had her pushed. Some think poison weakened her bones. Some think Elizabeth was involved. And here's where things get messy. Because Elizabeth, whether innocent or not, knew the optics. The moment she hears of Amy's death, she retreats, stops seeing Dudley privately, refuses to consider marriage to him, despite their deep connection. She knows the court would never accept it now, not after this. Marrying him would stain her reign forever. Amy's broken body becomes a ghost that haunts every throne room, every council meeting, every chapel where Elizabeth might have once whispered, "I do." There's an open scholarly debate that still simmers like a low-burning fire. Was Amy's death truly an accident? The inquest, with its 12 jurors, found no evidence of foul play. The verdict was legally clean. But legally clean doesn't mean morally clear. Some historians believe Amy may have taken her own life, aware her husband was slipping away, hoping to shame him or prevent his reign. Others think she was murdered by Dudley, by one of his overzealous retainers, or even by a rival faction hoping to frame him and destroy his chances with the Queen. You stand in the empty stairwell at Cumnor Place, the house now long gone, and try to imagine it. A lonely woman, deeply aware of her position, her husband distant, the Queen suspiciously affectionate, her own health deteriorating, and a decision, conscious or not, that would change the course of English history. Because Amy's death doesn't just stop a marriage, it solidifies Elizabeth's image. After that, the Queen begins leaning more heavily into her role as the Virgin Queen. If she had ever truly considered marrying Dudley, she abandons the thought now. The political cost is too high, the court too fragile, and so she folds away whatever private feelings she had, buries them beside Amy, and lets the legend take root. But she never lets Dudley go. She keeps him at her side, promotes him, entrusts him with power, but never again does she allow the idea of their marriage to breathe. When foreign ambassadors ask if he's her lover, she offers a withering smile. "I will have but one mistress here," she says once, reportedly to Lettice Knollys, after Dudley's secret remarriage, "and no master." Still, she keeps Amy's portrait. It's tucked away, but it's there. You wonder sometimes if she ever looks at it. You wonder if she ever feels guilty, not for the death itself, perhaps she truly knew nothing, but for what followed, for turning a man's heartbreak into a headline, for using a woman's corpse as a cautionary tale, for wrapping herself in innocence while the shadows did their work behind her. And Amy, she becomes a story no one tells directly, mentioned in footnotes, whispered about in anti-Elizabethan pamphlets, used as a warning against courtly ambition. But in truth, she was just a woman. Married young, left behind, dying far from power, she didn't choose this ending, but she became its symbol. And every time Elizabeth walked past a suitor's hopeful eyes, every time she smiled and said, "Not today," every time she let love simmer but never boil, you can hear it. A body thudding softly down a staircase. Some women learn to survive by stepping back into the shadows. Others, like Lettice Knollys, seem born with the gall to march straight into the sun, even knowing it might burn them alive. You first spot her at court in the early 1560s, a flash of auburn hair, a tilt of the head that feels just a little too confident, a smile that hints she knows more than she says. She moves like someone who's always one step ahead of her scandal, and honestly, you kind of admire it. Lettice is no stranger to power. She's Elizabeth's cousin, niece to Anne Boleyn, through her mother, and therefore part of the Tudor blood web. She's married respectably to Walter Devereux, a nobleman who dutifully traipses off to Ireland to chase rebellions and ambitions. They have children, build their estates, perform the expected rituals, but when Walter dies in 1576, possibly of dysentery, possibly of stress, possibly after receiving some very bad news from home, Lettice makes the one choice no Tudor woman was supposed to make. She marries Robert Dudley. Yes, that Robert Dudley, Elizabeth's Robert Dudley. Let's pause here and consider what kind of gall that takes. The Queen has been in love with this man for 20 years. Sure, she's never married him, but he's hers in every meaningful way. To go behind her back and take the man she never allowed herself to have, that's not just impolite, that's practically treason. Historical fact: Lettice Knollys and Robert Dudley married in secret in 1578 at Wanstead House. Elizabeth found out months later, and when she did, the fury was immediate, volcanic, and terrifying. Lettice was banished from court on the spot, not merely dismissed. Banished. She would never again be allowed in Elizabeth's presence. You see the Queen that morning. She's dressed in white, lips thin with rage, eyes dark with betrayal. It's not just that she lost a man she loved, it's that she lost control. Lettice was her cousin, her mirror, a reminder of everything she gave up to keep the crown. And now this woman, who shared her blood, had stolen what Elizabeth never allowed herself to have: a private life, a marriage, a chance at ordinary happiness, fringe detail. Elizabeth didn't just banish Lettice, she referred to her publicly as the she-wolf. It wasn't theatrical, it was personal, a woman who dared challenge her supremacy. And Dudley? He apologised, grovelled, tried to make peace, but it didn't matter. The Queen never forgave the betrayal. Their relationship was never the same. And here's the thing, Lettice didn't care. Not really. She had what she wanted, a man she loved, or at least respected, and a secure position. She wasn't some court flirt hoping to angle her way up the ranks. She was already someone. She had wealth, bloodlines, children, and now the Earl of Leicester at her side. Court favour? Overrated. The marriage was complicated. Dudley was never a one-woman man. He liked flattery, basked in Elizabeth's attention whenever he could get it, and often treated Lettice as a well-kept secret. But they had a child together, a boy named Robert, nicknamed the Noble Imper. He was bright, promising, and destined to inherit his father's title. You'd think this might begin to heal things, that Elizabeth, aging and politically calculating, might soften over time. She never did. Even as Dudley returned to court, even as years passed, Lettice remained exiled. Elizabeth forgave traitors more easily than she forgave female rivals. There's a debate, of course. Did Lettice marry for love? Power? Revenge? Was she bold or reckless? Did she believe she could outmaneuver the Queen? Or did she simply stop caring? Some argue she was a victim of court politics, swept into a storm not of her own making. Others think she knew exactly what she was doing and did it anyway. You see her years later, dressed in mourning black after Dudley's death in 1588. She buries him in a lavish tomb beside his illegitimate son, a move that raises eyebrows but reflects the strange, layered loyalties of their world. She mourns publicly, though you suspect she also feels something else: relief. Her son, the young Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex, becomes the next lightning rod. He's ambitious, charismatic, reckless, and just like his stepfather, dangerously close to the Queen. Too close. You remember Elizabeth's rage at Lettice. Watch what happens when she sees the same fire in her son. Lettice watches her son's rise with a mother's pride and a courtier's worry. He becomes the Queen's new favourite. Dashing, poetic, prone to foolish outbursts. And Elizabeth, now in her 60s, swoons like a girl of 16. He dances for her, fights for her, whispers promises into her aging ear. And she rewards him lavishly. Titles, offices, campaigns. But Essex is not Dudley. He doesn't play the long game. He wants glory, not grace, fringe detail. Lettice and her son had a strained relationship. She loved him fiercely, but he often disregarded her advice. She saw what the court did to ambitious men. She knew the Queen's favour could turn icy in a moment. And she warned him, again and again, don't overreach. He didn't listen. In 1601, after a failed rebellion and a disastrously arrogant attempt to seize control of the government, Essex is arrested. The Queen is heartbroken, but not indecisive. He's tried, convicted, and executed for treason. Lettice, now in her 60s, is forced to watch as another man she loved is destroyed by the very court she once dared to defy. Historical fact, Elizabeth signed Essex's death warrant herself, though it reportedly took her hours. She paced, delayed, considered clemency, but ultimately she chose to protect the crown over her heart, just as she always had. Lettice outlives them all, Dudley, Elizabeth, her son. She lives to the astonishing age of 91, dying in 1634 under the reign of Charles I. The world by then has changed completely, but her story still echoes in the faded corners of palaces and painted portraits. The woman who dared to marry the Queen's favourite, the she-wolf who survived. You picture her in her final years, sharp, elegant, watching young women fawn over new kings and remembering what it felt like to be at the centre of it all. She doesn't speak of the Queen, not in public, but you suspect she never forgot her. Not the fury, not the exile, not the strange, painful love they both carried for the same man. Two women, one her man, and a silence that outlived them both. Now it's time to shift your gaze north, across the windswept border and into a different kind of drama, no less tangled, no less dangerous. You've had your fill of Henry's wives, his mistresses, their lovers and betrayers. But in Scotland, a queen rises who will out-scandal, out-seduce and out-suffer every Tudor woman put together. Her name is Mary, and if Elizabeth is England's virgin queen, Mary, Queen of Scots, is its mirror image, tragic, passionate and eternally doomed. You meet her first in France, a teenage girl already steeped in Catholic grandeur. She's married to the sickly Dauphin Francis and crowned Queen Consort of France before she's even old enough to legally toast herself. The court calls her beautiful, long auburn hair, pale skin, eyes like dusk. But more than that, Mary is political gold. She's Queen of Scotland by birth, Queen of France by marriage, and most dangerously of all, a claimant to the English throne by blood. Historical fact, Mary's grandmother was Margaret Tudor, Henry VIII's sister, which made Mary a legitimate heir under traditional primogeniture. Catholics in England saw her as the true queen, especially while Elizabeth's legitimacy was still widely questioned after Anne Boleyn's fall. This bloodline would be the root of nearly every tragedy in Mary's life. When Francis dies young, chest infection, too delicate for politics, Mary is widowed at 18 and shipped back to Scotland. A queen in her own right, returning to a homeland she barely remembers. You ride with her across the grey, wet moors. The castles are colder, the nobles rougher, the religious tension sharp enough to shave your skin. Scotland is no velvet court. It's flint and bone. Protestant reformers call her a papist puppet. Men circle her throne like carrion birds. And Mary, she tries. You have to give her that. She tries diplomacy, marriage negotiations, careful governance. But she is a romantic, fatally so. While Elizabeth keeps her heart in a locked box, Mary seems to wear hers sewn right onto her bodice. And that's where the trouble starts. Because here comes Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley. Tall, handsome, vain, a peacock in human form. He's also her cousin, which seems to be a selling point at the time. More importantly, he's English nobility, another claimant to the English crown. Marrying him seems like a power move. A way to solidify Mary's position and produce an heir with an even stronger royal claim. But you already see the flaw. Darnley is a disaster. Historical fact. Mary married Darnley in 1565, but the honeymoon didn't last. He quickly revealed himself as arrogant, politically inept, and prone to drunken outbursts. He demanded the crown matrimonial, essentially equal rule, and sulked when Mary refused. The marriage becomes a war zone. Darnley's charm withers into cruelty. He resents Mary's power, mocks her counsellors, undermines her authority in public. And then comes the scandal you can practically hear, building like a drumbeat, the murder of David Rizzio. Ah yes, Rizzio, Mary's private secretary, an Italian musician turned diplomat. He's close to her, too close, people whisper. There are rumours, always rumours, that he's more than just her secretary, that he's her lover, that he's the true father of the child growing in her womb. The Protestant lords hate him. Darnley hates him more. Fringe detail: Rizzio was stabbed 56 times in front of a pregnant Mary during a dinner at Holyrood Palace. Darnley and his co-conspirators dragged Rizzio out from her private rooms, pinned him to the floor and butchered him within earshot of the court. His blood stained the floor so deeply it's said you can still see the marks today, even after centuries of cleaning and restoration. You're there, standing just outside the chamber, as the screams pierce the stone walls. Mary Boleyn, clinging to her belly, face pale with terror. Rizzio's body left sprawled in the corridor like trash. It's not just a murder, it's a warning. Darnley has crossed a line, and Mary, she never forgives him, but she uses him. Because she's clever, even now, she pretends reconciliation long enough to get him under control, long enough to give birth to their son, James VI of Scotland, the future James III of England, the heir that will eventually unify the crowns, the child that should have saved her reign. Instead, it's the beginning of her end. Darnley continues his downward spiral. Mary retreats emotionally, politically, physically, and in his place rises a new figure, James Hepburn, Earl of Bothwell. Bothwell is everything Darnley is not: rugged, bold, Protestant, experienced, dangerous in a different way. There's heat between them, tension that crackles like a storm on the horizon, and then, shockingly, suspiciously, Darnley is found dead. Historical fact: in 1567, Darnley was discovered in the garden of a house in Kirkerfield just outside Edinburgh. The house had been blown up with gunpowder. But here's the twist: his body showed no signs of burns or blast injuries. He and his servant had apparently been strangled after escaping the explosion, which means someone planted the bomb and then killed him the old-fashioned way. And guess who's the prime suspect? Bothwell. He's arrested, tried, and, unsurprisingly, acquitted in a rigged court. Weeks later, he abducts Mary on the road, takes her to his castle, and holds her there for days. Whether it was rape, coercion, or some twisted seduction remains hotly debated, even today. But what's undeniable is that shortly afterward they marry. Let that sink in. Mary, Queen of Scotland, widowed twice, once in scandal, marries the man everyone believes killed her second husband. The reaction is immediate. The Scottish nobles revolt. Mary is imprisoned, forced to abdicate. Bothwell flees to Norway and dies insane in a Danish prison. Mary loses everything: her throne, her freedom, her reputation. She escapes, flees to England, seeks asylum with Elizabeth, and finds a cage instead. You watch her arrive at the English border, weary but hopeful. Elizabeth welcomes her with politeness, but also with guards. For the next 19 years, Mary will live under house arrest in various castles and manor homes. Treated like both royalty and prisoner, always watched, always a threat, because as long as she lives, she gives England's Catholics a figurehead, a reason to hope for Elizabeth's fall. Mary is not the patient sort. She plots, writes letters. Couriers go in and out, carrying secret messages rolled into embroidery, folded into bookbindings, and eventually, inevitably, she's caught. The Babington plot, a failed Catholic conspiracy to assassinate Elizabeth and place Mary on the throne, is the final straw. Elizabeth signs the death warrant. Mary, Queen of Scots, is beheaded in 1587 at Fotheringhay Castle. She wears red, the colour of Catholic martyrdom. Her last words are prayers in Latin. It takes 3 strokes to remove her head. Fringe detail? When the executioner lifts her severed head to show the crowd, her wig slips off. Her head drops to the floor. Her small dog, hidden in the folds of her gown, runs out and refuses to leave the body. It's a mess. It's always a mess. And so ends Mary, romantic, reckless, brilliant, damned. She chose passion every time. She paid the price every time. And even in death she divided the kingdom. Elizabeth never speaks of her again, but the wound lingers, because in Mary she saw everything she could have been, and everything she refused to become, and now the boy with royal blood in both veins, the child born of scandal, crowned by survival. Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, may be long dead, but his legacy lives on in his son James VI of Scotland, the only undeniable good to emerge from a marriage that poisoned everything it touched. But before James claims the crowns of both Scotland and England, we need to pause and look back at the man who helped create that legacy. Because Darnley's story is more than a footnote. It's a warning that arrogance, ambition and beauty rarely mix well in a Tudor world. And when they do, someone usually ends up face down in a garden with a broken neck. You meet Henry Stuart in 1565, a tall, striking man with golden curls, velvet sleeves, and the kind of swagger that makes older nobles roll their eyes and younger ones clench their jaws. At first glance, he's everything a queen like Mary might want: young, royal, and thoroughly English. His lineage is impeccable. He descends from Margaret Tudor, Henry VIII's sister, giving him a legitimate, if shaky, claim to the English throne. More importantly, he's Protestant enough to not send the Scottish reformers into full revolt. Mary sees him and thinks, perfect. You see him and think, disaster incoming. Historical fact: Mary married Darnley in July 1565, despite objections from her advisors. Their union united two claims to the English throne, terrifying Elizabeth and every Protestant nobleman from London to the Highlands. It was a dynastic power move and politically a masterstroke. But in matters of temperament, catastrophic. Darnley is charming, yes, but he's also vain, entitled, and obsessed with status. He believes himself not just Mary's equal, but her superior. He demands the crown matrimonial, the legal right to rule alongside her, and potentially alone if she dies. Mary wisely refuses. This wounds Darnley's pride so deeply he spends the rest of the marriage trying to claw it back, usually with drink, rage, or idiocy. He becomes sullen, jealous, suspicious. You see it every time Mary speaks with a man, especially David Rizzio, her secretary. The tension simmers like sour wine. Darnley spreads rumours that Rizzio is her lover, that her unborn child is not his, that he's being humiliated, emasculated, erased, and when those rumours gain traction, he seizes his moment. March 1566. You're standing in the great hall of Holyrood Palace, the air thick with candle smoke and tension. Mary, visibly pregnant, is dining with her court. Rizzio is beside her, as usual. Then suddenly the doors burst open. Darnley storms in with a pack of armed nobles, angry, paranoid, bristling with testosterone. He pulls a pistol, others draw knives. They drag Rizzio screaming from the Queen's side. Mary stands, shouting, pleading, too late to stop it. Fringe detail, Rizzio is stabbed 56 times. So many that the floorboards beneath him buckle with blood. Mary's dress is smeared with it. She's shoved aside, clutching her stomach. Her cries echo through the halls. You wonder how a man could do this to his wife, and you wonder how Mary could ever forgive him. She doesn't, and yet she's clever. In the days that follow, she pretends to reconcile, smiles at Darnley, speaks to him gently, coaxes him back into her confidence. It's not love, it's survival. She's pregnant, alone, surrounded by enemies, so she plays the long game. Historical fact, just 3 months after Rizzio's murder, Mary gives birth to James. Despite everything, the child is healthy, whole, and immediately swept into political games far beyond his comprehension. Mary now holds the most powerful card in the game, an heir. But Darnley's days are numbered. He continues to spiral. Mary retreats further. She consults with James Hepburn, Earl of Bothwell, a brutal but effective nobleman. Rumours stir, alliances form, and then, in February 1567, the end arrives with fire and silence. Darnley is convalescing from illness at a house near Edinburgh. Mary has arranged for him to be moved there, out of the palace, out of sight. The house explodes in the early morning hours. Locals wake to find a smoking crater. But Darnley's body isn't inside, it's in the garden. Fully clothed, unburnt, neck broken. Fringe theory? The gunpowder was for show, a distraction. Whoever killed Darnley did it with hands, not fire. Some say Bothwell. Some say Mary knew. Others say she was a pawn, manipulated into cleaning up a political mess created by others. The question never truly finds an answer. The reaction is swift. The Scottish nobles are outraged. Darnley was awful, yes, but he was a king, and within weeks Mary does something truly shocking. She marries Bothwell, the man most suspect in her husband's murder. She claims he abducted her. Maybe he did, but the wedding proceeds. Catholic and Protestant alike recoil. From here, Mary's life unravels. Her nobles rebel. She's imprisoned. Forced to abdicate, she flees to England and begins her long imprisonment under Elizabeth's watchful eye. But we'll come back to that. Let's stick with Darnley for now, because here's the twist. In death, he gets what he always wanted. His son becomes king, James VI of Scotland, and eventually, after Elizabeth dies childless, James I of England. The first ruler of both kingdoms, the man who finally unites the crowns through the very bloodline that cursed his parents. There's a debate about how much of Darnley's madness James inherited. Some historians claim he was cold, vain, manipulative. Others say he was scholarly, cautious, and deeply aware of how close his life had come to ruin before it even began. He rarely spoke of his father, never celebrated him, but he understood the weight of his legacy. And Mary, she never gets to see him rule. You imagine her in her final days, imprisoned, knowing her son has been raised by Protestant lords who hate her. She writes letters to him, sends tokens, pleads for a reunion. It never happens. James, pragmatic and politically savvy, keeps his distance, He owes his crown to her blood, but not her memory. You stand at Darnley's grave. It's simple, unremarkable, a quiet end for a man who once strutted through palaces as if he owned the world. His life, a textbook case in what happens when ego outpaces intelligence. When charm is used like a cudgel, when a man marries a queen and forgets he isn't a king. He's a footnote in Mary's tragedy, an echo in James's legacy, and a reminder that in the Tudor world beautiful boys rarely live long. You already know how this ends. The room is cold, the walls are stone, the Queen kneels, the axe waits. But before we reach Mary, Queen of Scots' final breath, let's talk about the man whose murder dragged her down faster than any gossip ever could. Because before the Babington plot, before the English courts, before her long prison stay and ultimate execution, there was David Rizzio, a man who never wore a crown, never fought in battle, never married a queen. And yet, for a moment, he held the power of both a lover and a scapegoat in one trembling hand. You first meet Rizzio in 1561, standing in the echoing halls of Holyrood Palace in Edinburgh. He's small, elegant, foreign, an Italian musician by trade hired to entertain the court, a man with a good voice and a better sense of timing. He knows how to wait, how to smile at the right moments, how to flatter without grovelling. That, it turns out, is a rare talent in Mary's court. At first, he's just background noise. A player of lutes, a singer of songs, but as time passes, you notice he's always nearby. Close enough to hand Mary a letter, a goblet, a whispered observation. He's discreet, loyal, intelligent, and most importantly, not Scottish, which means he doesn't come with clan alliances or blood feuds. He's Mary's creature, and Mary makes good use of him. Historical fact, Rizzio rose quickly in the Scottish court, becoming Mary's private secretary and a key advisor in her inner circle. He managed correspondence, organised her household, and became deeply trusted by the Queen. Some reports claim he was with her at all hours, morning, noon and night, which is precisely the problem. The Scottish lords already resent Mary. A Catholic queen ruling a Protestant land, risky. A foreign queen with foreign advisors, intolerable. And now this, an Italian nobody, a servant who whispers in her ear, who controls her access, who may even know her secrets. They hate him, and Darnley, Mary's insecure, petulant husband, hates him most of all. Fringe detail, the rumours go beyond politics. Gossip spreads that Rizzio and Mary are lovers, that he's the father of her unborn child, that he's controlling her like some papal puppet. The fact that he's Catholic only fuels the paranoia. Add to that Darnley's bruised ego and his increasingly erratic behaviour, and it's only a matter of time before someone sharpens a dagger. March 1566. You're in Holyrood once again. Mary's chambers are candlelit and hushed, dinner laid out on the table. She's 5 months pregnant, visibly glowing, seated with Rizzio and a few ladies. There's laughter, soft music, a moment of calm. Then everything breaks. Darnley enters first, his face tight, his hands trembling. Behind him, a pack of armed men, nobles with drawn swords, faces twisted with something deeper than politics. Jealousy, fear, rage. Rizzio jumps up, confused. Mary rises too, demanding an explanation. Darnley murmurs something to her, something quiet and cruel, then steps aside. The men descend. They drag Rizzio from the room. Mary screams, clutches her belly. They ignore her. Outside the chamber, in the corridor, they pin him to the ground and stab him. Over and over and over. Historical fact, Rizzio was stabbed 50 times in front of half the court. His blood soaked through the floorboards. It was a public execution masquerading as a political statement. The lords claimed he was undermining the kingdom, manipulating the Queen, but really, it was a brutal display of masculine panic. Mary is traumatised, terrified, but she doesn't collapse and she plays the long game. She pretends to forgive Darnley, coaxes him back into her favour just long enough to escape the grip of the men who murdered her friend, just long enough to gather power, just long enough to set her sights on revenge. And the irony? Rizzio's death achieves the opposite of what the lords intended. Mary doesn't lose control, she tightens it. Public opinion sways. People see her, not as a foreign tyrant, but as a grieving woman, a strong queen standing alone against brutality. Sympathy swells, Darnley becomes more hated than ever. And the unborn child inside her miraculously survives. She gives birth to James VI, her heir, her son, a living rejection of the violence that tried to tear her down. There's a strange poetic debate among scholars about Rizzio's role in all this. Was he really Mary's lover? Some argue their closeness suggests intimacy. Others believe it was purely platonic, loyalty mistaken for seduction. Was he power-hungry? Or just the unfortunate target of men who couldn't imagine a queen trusting someone who didn't look like them? The truth, as always, is layered and lost. Fringe theory. Some believe Darnley didn't just murder Rizzio out of jealousy. They think he feared being replaced, not just as a husband, but as a father. That maybe he suspected or knew that Rizzio was the real father of Mary's child. It's unlikely, but rumours are fuel in royal courts. Facts matter less than belief. And belief? That's what doomed Rizzio. He's buried quietly. No state funeral, no ceremony, just a small marker. Today, if you visit Holyrood, they'll show you the blood stain on the floor, scrubbed, sanded, but never quite gone. People say it reappears from time to time, as if the stone itself remembers. You see Mary in the aftermath standing at that very spot. She doesn't cry, doesn't flinch, but her face hardens, something changes. The innocence, the romanticism burned out. From here on, her reign is darker, sharper. She makes more enemies, and when she finally marries Bothwell, another scandal, another catastrophe. You wonder if it all traces back to this, to that night, that blood, that betrayal, because Rizzio wasn't just a victim, he was a turning point. The moment Mary's story stopped being about potential and started being about inevitability. You remember that when she kneels at Fotheringhay years later, her red dress pooling around her feet, her eyes steady on the blade. The last Catholic Queen of Scotland, undone not just by war and politics, but by a single act of cruelty long ago in a candlelit room. And Rizzio? He doesn't get a monument. But history remembers, and sometimes that's enough. You've been here before. Castle walls, smoky torches, the scent of damp stone and long-rotted secrets. But tonight feels different, colder, like something heavy is about to fall. Mary, Queen of Scots, has lost nearly everything by now, her throne, her freedom, her child. What remains is reputation, and even that's bleeding out by the hour. But there's still one man left to destroy that last flicker of sympathy. James Hepburn, 4th Earl of Bothwell, the final fatal lover. If Darnley was a disaster and Rizzio a tragedy, Bothwell is the curse she never recovers from. You've seen his type before, rough around the edges, smiling too easily, a man who smells like horses and gunpowder and bad decisions. At first, you don't take him seriously. He's just another noble with too many debts and too few morals. But then he starts showing up in all the right rooms, talking to all the right people, getting just close enough to Mary without touching. And that's when you realise he's dangerous. Historical fact. James Hepburn, Earl of Bothwell, was a prominent Protestant lord in Scotland and a skilled military commander. He was also brash, bold, and not overly concerned with laws, etiquette, or the opinions of anyone beneath him, which, in his mind, included nearly everyone. After the murder of Rizzio, Mary leans on Bothwell more than ever. He helps her navigate the fallout, shields her from the wolves circling her court, and positions himself as a loyal protector. But it's more than politics. There's a spark between them, volatile, magnetic. You can see it in the way she turns toward him when others speak, in the silence that follows every conversation between them. Then comes Darnley's murder. We've already been there. Exploded house, unburned corpse, broken neck, but now we're standing in the aftermath, watching the vultures circle. Bothwell is the obvious suspect. The motive? Clear. The opportunity? Plentiful, yet somehow he's acquitted. The trial is rushed, the evidence flimsy, the outcome predetermined. You know a rigged verdict when you see one, and so does everyone else. But the real shock comes just weeks later, in April 1567, when Mary sets out on a journey and is intercepted by Bothwell and his men. She is taken, some say abducted, some say escorted, back to his stronghold at Dunbar. And there, behind closed doors, something happens that will stain her reputation forever. Fringe detail? Mary never writes down what occurred during those 10 days in Bothwell's custody, but years later in letters and testimonies the stories come out. She may have been raped. She may have consented. She may have believed she had no choice. The ambiguity is the weapon that history uses against her. What is undeniable? She marries him. Just weeks after Darnley's death, just days after being held in Bothwell's fortress, Mary becomes his wife. A Protestant ceremony. No pomp, no royal blessing, no joy. You can feel the shock ripple across Scotland. Her enemies leap on it like wolves. The Catholic nobility is appalled. The Protestants see it as political suicide. The people whisper, was she complicit in Darnley's murder? Is this her reward for silence, or has she simply lost her mind? There's an open scholarly debate about that marriage, and it still burns hot in academic circles. Was Mary under duress, manipulated by a ruthless man who knew exactly how to use fear and flattery? Or did she believe marrying Bothwell was her only way to secure the throne? Was it love twisted into survival, or just survival dressed up in the language of marriage? Whatever it was, it doesn't last. Within weeks the nobles rise against them. The Confederate lords march on Mary and Bothwell. The Queen, riding beside her new husband in armour, is a ghost of the woman she once was, haunted, cornered, desperate. They surrender at Carberry Hill without a fight. Bothwell flees, Mary is imprisoned, and just like that, the story ends. Or so it seems. Bothwell escapes to Scandinavia, but justice or karma catches up. He's arrested in Denmark, accused of piracy, and imprisoned in a dungeon. He dies there, insane, filthy, chained to a pillar, after a decade of isolation. A man who once seduced a queen reduced to an animal scratching at stone walls. No funeral, no last words, just rot. Historical fact. James Hepburn died in 1578 after nearly 10 years of imprisonment. He lost his titles, his fortune, his mind. He left no legitimate heirs, just ruin. Mary, meanwhile, is forced to abdicate in favour of her infant son. She escapes captivity once, tries to rally support, loses the Battle of Langside, and flees to England, where she seeks protection from her cousin Elizabeth. Big mistake. Elizabeth sees her not as a cousin, but a threat. For nearly 2 decades, Mary is held under house arrest. Lavish prisons, yes, manor houses, castles, but prisons nonetheless. And all the while, Elizabeth waits for her to step out of line. She does. Mary, ever impulsive, involves herself in the Babington plot, a failed conspiracy to assassinate Elizabeth and place Mary on the English throne. Letters are intercepted. Her handwriting is confirmed. The evidence is damning. She is tried, convicted, and sentenced to death. Fringe detail. On the day of her execution, Mary wore red, the colour of Catholic martyrdom. She carried a crucifix. Her final prayers were in Latin. The execution was botched. The first axe stroke missed her neck. The second struck bone. It took 3 strokes. When the executioner held up her head, her wig came off. Her head dropped to the floor. Her small dog ran from beneath her skirts and refused to leave the body. You stand in that room afterward. The silence thick and choking. A queen is dead. A son is silent. A cousin returns to her mirrors. And Bothwell? He's already dust. There's something almost fitting in how he dies. Forgotten, mad, buried in foreign soil, he was a man who grabbed for power with bloody hands. And in the end, those hands clawed only at the walls of a cell. Mary chose wrong. Again. Or maybe, like so many women of her time, the choice was never really hers. The axe has fallen. The dog has whimpered. The floor is slick with the grief of a nation that doesn't quite know how to mourn a woman it never really trusted. Mary, Queen of Scots, is gone, and now we shift our gaze to the other side of the battlefield, to the cousin who ordered the execution, signed the warrant, and then spent days claiming she didn't mean to. Elizabeth Tudor, the Virgin Queen, the master of contradiction, is staring at her reflection again. But this time there's a crack in the glass. You know her well by now. You've watched her flirt without yielding, govern without marriage, mourn without letting the mask slip. And yet, as her reign stretches on, one truth becomes clear. For all her power, all her wit, all her mastery of performance, Elizabeth's life is haunted by the ghosts of love, both the ones she denied herself and the ones she maybe, just maybe, allowed too close. It's time to talk about another Robert. Not Dudley, the long-burning torch of her youth, but a newer flame, Robert Devereux, 2nd Earl of Essex. He enters her life like a gust of wind in a locked room, loud, handsome, reckless, and about 30 years too young for subtlety. Historical fact, Robert Devereux was the stepson of Robert Dudley and cousin to Lettice Knollys, the woman Elizabeth banished from court for daring to marry her favourite. That alone should have made him poison. But no, the Queen sees him, and something clicks. Not romantic love, not exactly, but something dangerously close. You watch them circle each other across the polished floors and political chambers. He calls her sweet mistress. She calls him my Robin. Yes, another a Robin. She showers him with gifts, titles, lands. He returns the favour with poems, flattery, and reckless heroics. Everyone knows what's happening and no one can stop it. It's not a love affair in the physical sense, perhaps, but emotionally, it's an inferno. The court is stunned. Here is Elizabeth in her 50s and 60s, still holding court with a boy in his 20s. She dances, flirts, argues with him in public. He sulks, pouts, storms out of meetings. Their relationship is a carousel of indulgence and fury. She promotes him, then punishes him, then promotes him again. Fringe detail? At one point, Essex bursts into her private chambers unannounced while she is half-dressed. It's a shocking breach of etiquette, the kind of thing that could have gotten any other man hanged. But Elizabeth forgives him, quickly, too quickly. Everyone sees it, everyone wonders, you wonder too, but Essex is not Dudley. He lacks patience, strategy. He's not interested in keeping the Queen pleased. He wants to rule. He grows bold, starts speaking over her, challenges her decisions. He's sent to Ireland to put down a rebellion, and instead of crushing the Irish, he makes a truce with them, without permission. He abandons the campaign and returns to England in disgrace. Still, Elizabeth gives him another chance. She always gives him another chance, till the day he finally pushes too far. In 1601, Essex leads a failed coup, an actual armed rebellion in the heart of London. His goal? Vague. Some say he wanted to seize control of the court. Others claim he hoped to protect the Queen from corrupt advisers. Maybe he simply snapped. The man who once danced for Elizabeth in velvet hose now rides through the streets with a sword and a death wish. He is arrested within hours. Historical fact, the trial is swift. He is found guilty of treason. He writes to the Queen, begging for mercy. She delays the execution, once, twice, but finally signs the order. He is beheaded on Tower Green. Fringe detail? The executioner botched it. The first stroke didn't kill him, nor the second. It took 3 again, as with Mary. Some say the Queen cried when she heard. Others say she turned to her mirror and whispered his name. There's a scholarly debate about what Essex meant to Elizabeth. Was he a substitute for Dudley? A political weapon she didn't know how to control? A reflection of her own aging power, slipping just slightly out of reach? Some argue she loved him. Others say she loved the idea of being loved by someone so young, so beautiful, so doomed. Whatever the truth, his death leaves a hollow space, and she never really fills it. In the years that follow, Elizabeth grows quieter, less radiant. Her court still flourishes, but she retreats from the centre. She grows thinner, wears more pearls, more powder. Her teeth decay. Her famous red wigs become heavier, more elaborate, almost like armour. People still bow when she passes, but now they glance at each other afterward, as if asking, how much longer can she hold on? Fringe detail? Toward the end, she refuses to sit or lie down. She believes somehow that if she lies down, she will die. So she stands, day after day, till her legs tremble, until her courtiers panic, till she is finally lowered onto cushions, exhausted. Days later, she slips into unconsciousness, and does not wake. Elizabeth dies in March 1603, at the age of 69, the Virgin Queen, the Gloriana, the woman who ruled alone for 45 years, who outlived her lovers, her rivals, her enemies, who outlasted Mary, outmaneuvered Philip, and outlived Dudley by 15 years. She is buried in Westminster Abbey, in a tomb that rests directly above her sister Mary Tudor. 2 queens who hated each other in life, locked together in stone. There's an odd serenity in that final irony. And with her death, the Tudor dynasty ends. The crown passes to her distant nephew, James VI of Scotland, now James IV of England, the son of the woman she executed, because of the men they both loved. Now the throne is quiet, Elizabeth is gone, and with her the entire Tudor line, snuffed out like a candle at dawn. You'd expect the page to turn cleanly here, new chapter, fresh dynasty. But nothing in this story ends without echoes. The scandal, the heartbreak, the bloodstain, they don't just fade with a funeral procession, they ripple, and right at the centre of the next ripple is a man who shouldn't even be in the story anymore. Because this man has been dead for years, but he refuses to stay buried. Yes, we're talking about Thomas Seymour. You remember him, don't you? The swaggering brother of Jane Seymour, the last wife who gave Henry VIII a son before dying in the one way that spared her reputation. Thomas is handsome, smooth-talking, charming in the kind of way that should set off warning bells, but back then charm was still currency, and Thomas used it like a king's seal, pressing himself into history long after he should have been erased. Historical fact: after Henry VIII's death in 1547, Thomas Seymour became the Lord High Admiral and married Henry's sixth and final wife, Catherine Parr, who had outlived the king and deserved some peace, honestly, but instead of a quiet retirement, she got Thomas. You find them newly married, setting up house at Chelsea Manor. Catherine is grieving but hopeful, and she takes in her stepdaughter, the young Lady Elizabeth, 14 years old, red-haired, already clever and cautious. Thomas, meanwhile, starts hanging around Elizabeth's quarters. At first, it seems innocent, playful. He visits her early in the morning, tickles her, slaps her buttocks, wrestles with her while she's still in bedclothes. Yes, that's not a metaphor. Fringe detail? Catherine once joined in on these strange games, even holding Elizabeth down while Thomas cut her dress into ribbons with a dagger. Laughing the whole time. It was passed off as courtly fun, but you don't have to squint too hard to see something darker beneath it. Elizabeth is smart. She sees the line and realises Thomas is about to cross it. Or maybe he already has. So she leaves. Or rather, Catherine sends her away. Possibly out of jealousy, possibly to protect her. Either way, Elizabeth escapes just in time, but the story doesn't end there. Thomas Seymour's ambition knows no bounds. He wants power. Real power. So he sets his sights on Elizabeth again, but this time with a proposal, marriage. Yes, to the girl he once tickled in her nightgown, the girl who is second in line to the throne. It's grotesque, transparent, and very nearly successful. There's an open scholarly debate about whether Elizabeth truly reciprocated any affection for Seymour. Some suggest she was a girl starved for attention, manipulated into believing he cared for her. Others say she flirted back, enjoyed the attention, and was more calculating than we give her credit for. What's not debated is that Seymour's actions were dangerously inappropriate and politically suicidal. Because here's what happens next. Thomas starts plotting. He tries to gain control of the king, young Edward VI, just a boy at the time, by sneaking into his chambers at night. Yes, he literally breaks into the king's bedroom with a loaded pistol. This doesn't go over well. He's arrested, tried, executed for treason in 1549, and you'd think that'd be the end of him. Another reckless man who flew too close to the Tudor flame and got incinerated. But no, he becomes something else entirely, a scandal-shaped ghost. Because years later, long after she's queen, Elizabeth's enemies will use Seymour's name like a dagger. Every time she resists marriage, they whisper, it's because of what he did. Every time she refuses intimacy, they say, he ruined her. Every refusal to be touched, to be claimed, to be controlled blame Thomas Seymour. Fringe theory? Some claim Elizabeth was no virgin at all, that she lost her innocence to Seymour at 14, and her entire identity as the Virgin Queen was built as a shield against that shame. Others argue the opposite, that Seymour was her first lesson in survival. That she learned early what happened to women who let love cloud their judgment, and she vowed never to be anyone's pawn again. You watch her decades later, seated on her throne in full regalia, the image of strength, and yet, you remember the girl she was, pale-faced, alone, chased from one household to another. You remember the inquiry she endured after Seymour's arrest, interrogated for hours, her letters searched, her words twisted. She was 16, and already she understood. The crown would never protect her. Only her wits could do that. Historical fact, Elizabeth was questioned heavily after Seymour's execution, suspected of complicity. She denied everything. No evidence was ever found. But the suspicion lingered. She survived it. That's the part everyone forgets. Elizabeth survived Seymour, survived the court that wanted to destroy her, survived Dudley, Essex, Mary, Philip, plots, poison, pressure, and perhaps she owed that first hard lesson to the man who betrayed her before she even became a woman. You stand at Seymour's forgotten grave. Simple, unmarked, no tomb, no legacy, just a name etched in scandal and whispers. And yet somehow his shadow touches the whole dynasty, because every queen who came after him had to live in the wake of what he taught them. How love could be a weapon, how charm could rot into control, and how survival, real survival, meant stepping over the men who claimed to love you and walking alone into power. Elizabeth did that. Mary didn't. And Catherine Parr. She died in childbirth not long after marrying Seymour. Because of course she did. Because in the Tudor world, even the quietest queens don't get soft endings. Sometimes you wonder if Catherine Howard ever really stood a chance. She wasn't raised to be a queen, wasn't trained in court diplomacy, and wasn't given the armour of education or the luxury of caution. She was just a girl, 15, maybe 16, when the king noticed her. Beautiful, naive, and disastrously unprepared for what it meant to be loved by Henry VIII. But in the Tudor court, beauty is both currency and curse, and Catherine, she was rich in all the wrong ways. You meet her first at court in 1540, twirling through a dance with laughter on her lips and a gown too fine for her birth. She's a niece of the powerful Duke of Norfolk, placed in the household of Anne of Cleves, Henry's fourth wife, who it turns out is already teetering on the edge of dismissal. Catherine's presence in that household is no accident. The Howards are hungry for influence, and they know exactly how to bait the king's appetite. Historical fact: Catherine Howard was first cousin to Anne Boleyn, Henry's ill-fated second wife. Both were raised in the same ambitious family, both were accused of adultery, and both lost their heads for it. Henry notices Catherine during the last gasps of his failed marriage to Anne of Cleves. The German queen is plain, awkward, and politically inconvenient. Catherine, on the other hand, is everything Anne is not: young, flirtatious, English. Henry, nearing 50 and increasingly sick, is instantly besotted. He calls her his rose without a thorn, which is ironic, if you think about it for more than 3 seconds. She marries the king in July 1540. She is a teenager. He's almost 50. She calls him Your Majesty. He calls her sweetheart, and showers her with jewels and gowns and promises. The court whispers that she's the new Anne Boleyn, but Catherine is no Anne. She's not cunning, not calculating. She's a child in a lion's cage, and no one tells her where the teeth are. Fringe detail: Henry is grotesquely overweight at this point, with a festering leg wound that smells of death. Catherine is reportedly repulsed by him. And yet she plays her part, dutiful, smiling, obedient. For a while it works, but Catherine carries secrets. Before her marriage, while living under the supervision of her step-grandmother, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk, Catherine had engaged in flirtations, some consensual, some murkier. One was with her music teacher, Henry Manox. Another was with a young man named Francis Derham, who referred to her as his fiancée and claimed they had exchanged vows. These relationships were known, barely concealed, by the other girls in the household. The Duchess's home was more scandalous than sacred. When Catherine becomes queen, Derham resurfaces. He's given a post in her household, possibly at her request. It's foolish, reckless, but perhaps she thought she could control the past, that it wouldn't follow her into the palace. It always does, and then she makes the fatal mistake. She begins a relationship with Thomas Culpeper, one of the king's most favoured gentlemen, charming, young, handsome, a court golden boy. The attraction is mutual, dangerous. Some say they met in secret at night, that they exchanged love tokens, that there was a key to a back staircase involved. Others say they were just foolishly close, too much talking, too many shared glances. There's an open, scholarly debate about whether Catherine and Culpeper's relationship was consummated. Some historians believe they had a full affair. Others think it never reached the physical point, but was still damning enough. What's clear is that the King's Council viewed it as treason, and once the accusations started, the truth was irrelevant. Historical fact: in 1541, just over a year into her marriage, Catherine was arrested. Her past relationships with Manox and Derham were exposed first. Then came the allegations about Culpeper. Letters were found, servants questioned. The web unravelled quickly. Fringe detail: one of Catherine's letters to Culpeper includes the line, "Yours as long as life endures." That one sentence sealed her fate. Whether it meant love or lust didn't matter. The king took it as betrayal. You see Henry's face when he finds out. The disbelief, the betrayal, the rage. He doesn't just mourn a wife, he mourns the illusion of youth she gave him. He thought Catherine was pure, untouched, a chance to rewrite his failures. Her infidelity shatters that dream and sends him into a spiral of grief and fury. Derham and Culpeper are executed first. One hanged, drawn and quartered, the other beheaded out of mercy. Catherine is imprisoned in her apartments for weeks, confused and terrified. She's never trained for this, never told how to defend herself. When the time comes, she begs the king for mercy. He doesn't answer. And then comes the morning of February 13th, 1542. Catherine, barely out of her teens, is led to the scaffold on Tower Green. She's pale, composed as someone can be when facing an axe. Before her death, she reportedly says she dies a queen, but would rather have died the wife of Culpeper. Whether she actually spoke those words is debated, but they've lasted, because they feel true. Fringe detail. The night before her execution, Catherine asks for the block to be brought to her cell so she can practice placing her head on it. She wants to get it right. Wants to die well. Whatever you think of her, that detail lands heavy. The axe falls. Her head joins the chorus of ghosts that now echo through Tudor corridors. Another Howard lost to ambition. Another queen used, discarded, and buried beneath stone. But her story doesn't fade. It lingers in the margins, in the love letters that survived, in the hallways where she laughed too loudly. And her ghost, if you believe such things, still walks the haunted gallery of Hampton Court Palace, where she ran screaming for Henry's mercy the night she was arrested. He didn't come, he never does, and so she runs, still. You hear her before you see her, footsteps echoing down the stone corridor, not hurried, not tentative, just steady, measured, like a woman who's done with asking permission. This is Catherine Parr, Henry VIII's final wife, the one who survived. But survival doesn't always mean victory, not in Tudor England. Sometimes it just means you're left standing while everyone else crumbles around you. And Catherine, she stands tall, but her hands shake a little more than they used to. You meet her in 1543, 30 years old and already twice widowed. Not the wide-eyed girl her predecessors had been, but a woman with eyes that have seen enough. Henry is old now, overweight, infected, paranoid. Most men whisper that no woman in her right mind would marry him now, but Catherine steps forward. Not because she's in love, though she's careful to never say otherwise, but because she sees something else, a chance, a role to play, and a dangerous game to win. Historical fact, Catherine Parr married Henry VIII in July of 1543, becoming his sixth and final wife. She was not just a companion, but a nurse, a stepmother, and occasionally even a regent when Henry left the country. She was also deeply religious and a published author, the first English queen to publish under her own name. She's good at the job, too good. She soothes his temper, tends to his ulcerating leg, flatters him with precisely the right tone. Not too sweet, not too submissive. She brings his children, Mary, Elizabeth and Edward, closer to court, acting as a bridge in a fractured royal family. Even Elizabeth, cautious as ever, warms to her. For a moment it feels like peace. But of course this is the Tudor court. Peace never lasts, because Catherine isn't just gentle, she's intelligent. And in a world where queens are expected to smile and stitch and birth sons, intelligence is always a liability. She engages in theological debates, reads forbidden texts, writes religious pamphlets, supports Protestant reformers. In other words, she starts to scare people. Fringe detail? Catherine owned a secret printing press hidden in her closet. It wasn't just for leisure, it was used to produce religious materials, some of which bordered on heresy under the wrong laws. And depending on which faction had the king's ear that day, heresy could easily become treason. There's a scholarly debate about just how close Catherine came to being executed. One popular theory is that in 1546, Henry's council prepared an arrest warrant for her after she engaged in religious arguments with the king, yes, the king, about matters of faith and scripture. Supposedly it was the conservative faction led by Bishop Gardiner and Lord Wriothesley who convinced Henry she was a danger. You can feel the tension when she finds out. A servant leaks the warrant. Catherine goes straight to Henry, not with defiance but with humility. She plays the game to perfection. She tells him she only argued to distract him from his pain, that she's nothing but a vessel for his superior wisdom, that he is her spiritual guide, and Henry, flattered as ever, calls off the arrest. Historical fact. The very next day, Wriothesley arrives with guards to arrest her, and finds the king embracing her instead. The warrant is dismissed, but Catherine from that moment on stays clear of anything that might smell like reform, at least publicly. But that's just one of the men who tried to destroy her. The one who truly leaves a mark on her life isn't Henry, it's the man she loved before she became queen, and the man she returns to when the crown finally slips away. His name? Thomas Seymour. Yes, that Thomas Seymour. Brother to Jane Seymour, uncle to Edward VI, and if you remember from earlier, a man with a flair for ambition and an almost pathological disregard for caution. Before Henry proposed, Catherine had been romantically involved with Seymour. Some say they were practically engaged, but when the king came calling, Catherine chose duty, and perhaps safety over desire. Fringe detail? Catherine kept Seymour's love letters. Even while married to Henry, she never stopped thinking about him. Never stopped wondering what could have been. Then Henry dies in 1547, and Catherine moves quickly. Too quickly, according to some. Within months, she secretly marries Seymour, and the court gossips explode. It's not just the speed, it's the fact that she doesn't wait for approval from the new regime. Seymour, as always, wants power. And Catherine, she just wants something for herself, finally. But the marriage isn't what she hoped. Seymour is impulsive, arrogant, often inappropriate. You've already heard about his behaviour toward the young Princess Elizabeth, his morning visits, his inappropriate jokes, his tickling games. Catherine catches on, and whether out of jealousy or concern, she sends Elizabeth away. There's a heartbreaking open question in this period. Did Catherine suspect Seymour's true intentions? Did she feel betrayed by the man she risked everything for, or was she simply trying to preserve what little dignity their union had left? She becomes pregnant, not for the first time in her life, but the first time the pregnancy holds. She's in her mid-30s and the risks are high. Still, she's overjoyed, writes letters full of hope. Finally, she imagines a future with a child, a family, a new chapter. She gives birth to a daughter, Mary Seymour, in August 1548. 6 days later, Catherine is dead. Historical fact, Catherine Parr died of puerperal fever, childbed fever, a common and often deadly postpartum infection. Her final days were filled with delirium and rage. She accused Seymour of neglect, of betrayal, of poisoning her. Whether any of it was true, we'll never know. Fringe detail. Catherine's grave is in Sudeley Castle in the chapel she helped restore. She's the only Queen of England buried on private land, not in Westminster or St. George's. Her tomb was lost for centuries, rediscovered in the 18th century when workers stumbled across a lead coffin. Her body was reportedly so well preserved they thought she was merely asleep. And her daughter? She vanishes from the record. Some believe Mary Seymour died young, her inheritance stolen, her name erased. Others think she married and lived quietly, away from the court that swallowed her mother whole. It's fitting somehow. The daughter of a woman who walked the edge of power and survived, only to be forgotten. Catherine Parr's legacy isn't loud. It's not scandalous like Anne Boleyn or tragic like Catherine Howard, but it's sharp, enduring. She outlasted Henry, raised his children, published books, played politics, loved dangerously, and died in a room far from court, bleeding out the price of finally choosing her own desire. She survived the king, but not the aftermath. The room is quiet now. The noise of executions, the gossip, the screaming, the silken blood, all of it fading into stone. You've walked through the lives of queens and their lovers, through whispered confessions and catastrophic choices. Now, in the last echoes of the Tudor age, the court seems to hold its breath. The men are dead. The crowns have changed hands. The women have either ruled or perished, or, in some cases, done both. And yet one thread remains, the women themselves, not as victims, not even as survivors, but as the most dangerous players in a game everyone assumed belonged to kings. You stand in a long gallery, portraits lining the walls, Anne Boleyn with her dark eyes and sly smile, Catherine Howard, young and wide-eyed, still running, Elizabeth, half goddess, half lie, her hand gripping a globe, Mary, Queen of Scots dressed in martyr's red, and above them all the ghost of Henry VIII looms, not just in body but in the shadow he cast across every woman's life in his orbit. But let's not end with him, let's end with them, the queens, the consorts, the rivals, on their own terms. Because despite the headlines and the historical shorthand, this story was never just about who slept with whom. It was about power, about how women wielded it in secret, in silk, in letters passed under doors and confessions whispered behind fans. Some married their way into influence, others risked everything for moments of connection. Some were used, some used back, and almost all of them understood that in a world built for men, scandal was often the only language women had left. Take Lettice Knollys, for instance. Remember her, the cousin Elizabeth exiled for marrying Robert Dudley? She didn't vanish after that. No, Lettice lived well into her 90s, survived her son's execution, outlived her rival, died with all her teeth, which in the 1600s basically made her a sorceress. She never regained favour, but she kept her titles, her lands, her dignity. Quiet victories, the kind women had to settle for when grand ones weren't allowed, or Bess of Hardwicke, not a queen, but every bit as formidable. Married 4 times, each husband wealthier than the last. By the time of her death, she was the richest woman in England after the Queen. She built Hardwicke Hall, made from glass and ambition. Her granddaughter married a future king. She played marriage like chess and won every time. No scandal needed, just calculation. And then there's Elizabeth I, the final queen of the dynasty, whose entire reign was one long performance of control. No husband, no heirs, just the weight of a crown she wore like armour. Her lovers, real or imagined, fell into step behind her. Robert Dudley, whose death left her speechless. Robert Devereux, whose execution cracked something in her. Foreign suitors came and went, tools in her diplomatic arsenal, but no one ever claimed her. She was both queen and myth. By the time she died, she had convinced an entire nation that her body belonged to the country, not to any man. Fringe detail? Elizabeth was buried with her half-sister Mary Wyre. Bloody Mary! The Catholic queen she once feared and defied. Their shared tomb carries only Elizabeth's name. A final erasure. A final declaration of dominance. Even in death, the Virgin Queen took up all the space. There's an open, scholarly debate still raging in the quieter corners of academia about whether the Tudor queens had true agency or were simply puppets of circumstance. It's tempting to paint them as tragic, abused, betrayed, beheaded, but that's only half the story. Yes, they suffered, but they also schemed, they planned, they shaped the course of history not just through marriage and motherhood, but through intellect, resilience, and an understanding of politics most men never gave them credit for. Anne Boleyn didn't just flirt her way to the throne, she revolutionised England's relationship with the Catholic Church. Catherine Parr didn't just nurse her husband, she published theological works that influenced the Reformation. Even Catherine Howard, often dismissed as a silly girl, left behind a letter that suggests she knew exactly what game she was playing and the price she might pay. And Mary, Queen of Scots? Maybe she was too passionate. Maybe she trusted too easily. But she outlasted plots, betrayal, and decades of imprisonment with her identity intact. She died with dignity. And her son became king of both England and Scotland, something Elizabeth never managed. Fringe detail? James I, Mary's son, ordered that her body be moved to Westminster Abbey in 1612, 25 years after her execution. She now lies in a magnificent tomb near Elizabeth's. 2 queens, once enemies, now neighbours for eternity. And Mary's tomb, taller. You can argue about who won and who lost. But here's what's undeniable. The Tudor queens were never silent. They wrote letters. They made alliances. They broke rules. They kissed the wrong men and survived the fallout, or didn't. They danced at court, smiled through betrayal, and used every weapon available to them, from beauty to books to the strategic placement of a hairpin. And the men? Well, most of them ended up dead, disgraced or forgotten. The lovers of the Tudor queens are footnotes in stories far larger than their names. They came in like storms and left like shadows. Their ambition may have burned bright, but it rarely lasted. Because the scandal wasn't that queens had lovers. The scandal was that they dared to love on their own terms. So here you are, standing at the edge of the story, the candle burning low. You've watched them dance, bleed, argue, flirt, die. You've followed every whisper, every forbidden glance. Every love letter folded into a bodice. And now the music has stopped. But if you listen closely, you can still hear it. A slipper on stone, a door creaking shut, the soft hiss of silk. A queen moving through the shadows. One more time.